by Keir Starmer.
I know.
He'll never give up. He's not a Democrat. He's not a Democrat.
He's doing it by instalments, isn't he? But now he's not hiding it.
Yeah, we'll be rule takers, not rule makers. We may as well go back in. Have a referendum. Have a referendum. That's fine. I'm happy to fight a referendum, mate, because you'll lose.
Julia Hartley-Brewer, cracking show on the way after the news at 10 o'clock, right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the last 4 hours with Ian Collins. As I say, rather disconcerting seeing him at 10 in the morning, not at 1 o'clock. Don't know if I'm coming or going. Also, don't know whether we're in the EU or not, because, wow, Keir Starmer seems to think we absolutely should be back in. But we knew that already, didn't we, when he was Shadow Brexit Secretary? He pretended to, but didn't actually accept the biggest single democratic vote for anything ever in the history of our country, that Brexit referendum we're coming up to the 10th anniversary of in just a couple of months, back in 2016. He spent the next 3 years as Shadow Brexit Secretary trying to fight Brexit, trying to stop it from happening. It even forced into the Labour manifesto, let's face it, with the support of most of the Labour shadow cabinet at the time, that they should have a second referendum, because we were a bit stupid, weren't we? We were a bit fooled by stuff written on the side of a bus. We didn't really know what we were voting for in 2016, you and me both, that and being bigots, obviously, and therefore we needed to be asked again, like, we'll do a deal, we'll renegotiate, and then we can vote it again. They were convinced that they would win that vote. Well, the British public weren't convinced by that, and they voted to get Brexit done, elected Boris Johnson into power in 2019. And now, though, now Labour back in power, on a manifesto, by the way, that was very, very clear. We would not return to the single market. We would not return to the customs union, the two key tenets of the EU. But now they're trying to get us under 30s free movement. They signed us up to the regulations involving food and agricultural exports. And now they want to basically betray us even more, signing us up to sort of King Henry VIII style rules, where basically there'll be a vote in Parliament that cannot be, the bill cannot be changed in any way whatsoever. It's either for or against, bearing in mind they've got a massive majority. Labour can get anything through. They're a bunch of Ramonas anyway, so we know they'll get through. And basically, it will set up what's called a statutory instrument. And this will effectively mean that every single time the EU changes its rules on anything, we will change ours too. And MPs won't get a say. Sounds like democracy, doesn't it? Oh, no, it really doesn't. It sounds like being back in the EU, but being a rule taker, not a rule maker. Well, that's an argument for going back in, isn't it? No, Keir Starmer, it's an argument to not betray the biggest democratic vote for basically our democracy and our national sovereignty that there has ever been. But we'll be discussing that, and I want to hear from you. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. I'm sure you're fully supportive of what the Prime Minister is doing, and I'm sure you want to make your views known. So do get in touch. You can also get in touch using the word talk, texting that to 87222, and then your message. You can also get in touch by messaging us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged the national rate, and text costs £1 standard network rate message. We're also going to be talking about the local elections. More than half of Starmer's cabinet ministers could lose their seats at the next election, largely to reform. But also, we're going to be talking about Donald Trump's plan at 3 o'clock today, our time, to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Yep, if no one else can get in or out, neither can Iran's approved ships taking oil to China and elsewhere. Keir Starmer has said the UK will not be joining. And we'll talk about that victory in Hungary for the brand new leader of that country. And that, of course, is Peter Meagher. He has won it's now thought to be a 2/3 majority in that election, ousting Viktor Orban from power after 16 years. How significant is that? Well, I'm pretty sure my next guest will be able to talk about all of those topics and give us some insights. Delighted to say Conservative commentator Benedict Spence joins us this morning. Good morning to you. Morning. Great to see you. So much to talk about. Should we start with Brexit betrayal? Another Monday, another Brexit betrayal. Yeah. I mean, is it a surprise to you at all?
Well, no, it's not a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Brexit wasn't just about leaving the European Union. It was about reforming British politics as it was, and that project has never really got off the ground. No. These are the same people, ultimately, that wanted us to stay in the European Union. We've not got rid of them. No matter what a political party actually tells you, you should never believe it. You should never... this nonsense that people go, oh, but it was or wasn't in the manifesto. Everybody lies in their manifestos. Yep. It's baked into British politics now. This is
That's why our taxes haven't gone up.
Yeah, exactly. But this is because this is a political class that doesn't really have any vision. It has an idea of what it would like to be, and that is that it would like its life to be as easy as possible. And actually, if everything is given to Europe to do, well, then it doesn't have to do anything,
But it's not just that. No, it is that they also have utter contempt for ordinary voters.
They do have that.
They genuinely think if only everybody was like them and they had some pointless arts degree from university and that they did some job, you had to wear a lanyard all day.
You were about to say some polytechnic and then you remembered they're all from Oxford.
Yeah, exactly, are all Oxford. No, but they think that everybody who didn't, and they just think they think that basically if the technocrats were in charge, everything would be so much better. How did that work out for all of us, and indeed the EU for the last 20 or 30 years? Because I'm not sure very well. They think that we're all bigoted idiots and we shouldn't be allowed to say. That's basically their viewpoint.
And the amazing thing is, though, even when we do sometimes have elections, half the country still seems to want to vote for these, these kind of people. So actually, as much as we might joke and say, well, they think that we're all idiots, at least some of us are, because some of us keep voting for these people.
I mean, that is certainly for true. I mean, again, it's been being accused of yet another Brexit betrayal. And it's a technical thing. It's all very technical, and their view is, well, we're not going back to the single market. We're not going back to the customs union. Though that was what was in our Labour manifesto, so we're not breaching that. But we sign up to all the rules, and you sign up to all the future rules, and Parliament does not get a say at all. As in, they have this one vote. It's going to be in the King's speech in early May. Again, assuming that's all going ahead after the local elections. We'll see how bad those are for the Prime Minister. And then under that, this called this King Henry VIII powers, basically allowing ministers to approve laws without full scrutiny of each individual change. That's where the problem is. I mean, that is where the problem is, isn't it? Because we're not going to get a say. But we don't get a say in the EU laws either. But we know that's their argument, which is, but we're rule takers, not rule makers. We may as well go back in.
Yeah.
But we didn't have much say anyway, because it used to be the case that Britain had a veto on lots of different issues. And one of the reasons why the EU got more and more insane was they moved to what's called qualified majority voting. So although we're a big country, payload, and we get a good say, we don't get to go, no, this is stupid, it's not in our interest.
Yeah, and this is the thing that I've never quite understood about so many people who still cling to the idea that being part of the European Union is a good idea.
Yeah.
You don't get a say, is the reality. And if somebody decides that they're going to pass some harebrained concept and that's going to be applied to everybody, ultimately it's the least democratic institution you could possibly think of. You don't get a choice over this. It's imposed on you from above. And the insane thing, of course, is that we now find ourselves in a position, having given ourselves the opportunity to rid ourselves of this, that we're just deciding to sign up for all of these things without any of the few perks that we had to begin with.
The worst of all worlds.
Yeah.
Like, my thing is, you want to have a referendum, if you want to get elected, any party wants to say, we'll have an EU referendum to go back in, you're welcome to put that in your manifesto, put it to the British people, and if you get elected, then you can hold the referendum, and then we'll have the proper full discussion. There ain't a snowball in hell's chance the British people have voted to go back to the EU. I'm telling you, the terms they would offer would be so hilariously bad, that I mean, it's just not a chance. We've got this EU summit in the summer with Ursula von der Leyen. I mean, that's just going to be a total humiliation. As it is already, we've got this under-30s free movement, which, well, by the way, who are the people who tend to move to different countries and go and work there for really cheap wages? Oh, is it under-30s? And basically, far more people in the EU speak English who want to come here than British people go to the EU. And it's not because we're useless at our languages. We don't need to speak, Hungarian or Polish, because we speak English, which is the lingua franca, ironically, of the world. It's quite extraordinary. Added to this, by the way, a lot of people have covered this over Easter and been quite a few articles about it. Those travel delays brought in because we're not in the EU. I'm wondering if the timing of this is quite interesting. They came in last October, but basically April, they're supposed to be fully enforced just in time for the Easter holes. They were delayed by the French over the Olympics. Like, for goodness sake, don't make it hard for the Chinese and the Americans to come and spend money here. But basically, new EU entry-exit border controls, meaning long queues, you have to do your biometrics. And what I can gather, you need to do your biometrics every time. You can't just go, 2 weeks before I go away, I'll go and get those done. You're going to have to do it every time. And that's up to them. Again, that's up to them what they want to do. But it's made long delays. I mean, people are arriving 4 hours before a flight that only takes an hour and a half back to Britain, and they're in the queue for that entire time and then miss their flights. People have been stranded with young babies in Lisbon and I think some in Milan as well. I mean, it's just crazy. But if the EU wants to do it, that's fine. But here's the message we just say, well, you know what? We won't go on those little weekend breaks. I've got a weekend break, planned in Lisbon in a couple of weeks' time. If the delays are awful, I won't do a load of those. If you don't want me to come and spend money in your hotels and your restaurants and on your taxis and in your bars, and I do spend a lot on those things, that's fine. That's fine. I won't then. I won't. I mean, that's up to them. But they will feel the penalty of that.
Well, except that they don't really care. Is the reality. The
local people care.
The local people care, but it's not really a democracy, so it doesn't matter. Well, this is the thing. They don't care about
They're punishing us.
Yeah, they don't care about economic prosperity in the European Union. They care about regulation. It's about control. It's not about growth or anything like that. And so, yes, this is the thing. You might have lots of economies across Europe that are now based on tourism because industry's been stripped out because of over-regulation as much as anything else. But do you think that the bureaucrats are going to care about that? They don't care about people.
That's true. No, it's a very fair point. But if you think the Spanish economy can survive without British tourists, I mean, good luck with that, guys. But also, they're going to make it slow for Americans as well. They're the ones who come and spend the big wonga.
Yes.
And Americans ain't going to put up with that nonsense. They really, really are. The sort of Americans who can afford to come and do their European tours, spending a fortune of 5-star hotels and all the theatres and all that, they ain't going to put up with 5 hours in an airport, guys. They really aren't, and especially not at each airport they arrive. But good luck to that EU. Good luck. You carry on as you are. But I will carry my British passport with pride through an airport. I still think I stand by it. Let's also talk about another interesting development for the EU, and that is Viktor Orban being ousted. 16 years he's been in power. Incredibly authoritarian. Grew up. Now, a lot of things he's done over the years, I'm quite a big fan of. 120-mile massive big barbed wire fence to keep all the people smugglers, the trafficked gangs, out of the ones from the Serbian border, out of Hungary. They went from like tens of thousands of arrivals to like a couple of dozen over a period of a year by putting up this fence, taking no nonsense, not doing the woke stuff. I've got to be honest with you, all in favour of that. However, although he's got big support from Trump, who sent over J.D. Vance, his vice president, last week to campaign for him, not looking good for J.D. Vance, but he killed off a pope. He's killed off Viktor Orban's chances. That's not looking good. But also clearly far too close to Vladimir Putin, to the extent that, literally handing him information about what the EU was planning to do, tackle Ukraine. This is absolutely a good thing for Europe that Viktor Orban is ousted, particularly by the fact he's ousted by Peter Meagher, who used to be in his party. He's got a solid two-thirds majority. It looks like he's going to be able to actually make constitutional changes. He's from the right. He's not some liberal woke guy, which the left will be hoping he ain't. This is a good move for the Hungarian people, isn't it?
I think it's also about corruption, fundamentally, is that there was a great, I think, dissatisfaction with levels of corruption in Hungary. It's not particularly surprising that an Eastern European country might have high levels of them, but I think, especially when you've had somebody who's been in power that long, actually far too many things can sort of be people let things slide. And I think actually a lot of people in Hungary just had enough of that. And I think it is important, as you say, this is not a shift to the left. This is, I think, just a reaction against an individual. As to whether or not this is, for instance, to do with Ukraine and his closeness to Russia, it is sort of painted as him being an ally of Putin. He's not an ally of Putin. That's a wrong way to put it. He is somebody who, I think, took a slightly more, if you like, pragmatic approach to trying to, a more Trumpian approach, if you like, to trying to get peace, which was that Ukraine ought to give things up, which, of course, is not in line with what most Europeans think. Now, the thing to think about this is, because of where Hungary is in Europe, they are justifiably terrified of Russia, because in their recent history, the tanks have rolled through Budapest. And now it's interesting that it's a different situation in the Czech Republic and Poland. Theirs is a much more sort of aggressive approach to them. But Hungary, I think, understood on some level. It's a tiny country. Realistically, it doesn't actually matter a great deal. So it's kind of amazing that the American right and lots of ways of the British right seem to think that it matters. But it doesn't. It tried to carve out a niche for itself between great powers over this conflict. And I think it was given a real slapping, ultimately, is what's happened. So I understand why lots of people are saying it's a good thing that Viktor Orban's gone because he's, a Putin lapdog. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think it really made that much difference. Swathes of European weapons and American weapons were not going to suddenly find themselves in Ukraine because of Viktor Orban.
But he did for a long time stymie the EU's efforts. And again, one of the reasons you don't want to be in the EU is you can't make these decisions. You're at the behest, one country can stop these things on the important stuff, which you don't want them to be able to stop. But it is interesting that, the concerns about basically giving information. There's lots, I think, I can't remember who at Bloomberg, I think it was, had a report about evidence of a transcript of, him basically coming out of an EU meeting and giving information to Putin. I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. And the corruption levels. That said, the whole, the EU punishing them for putting up a fence and saying, we're not taking asylum seekers, we're not allowing people to just walk into our country. No, thank you. Thank God for Viktor Orban on that front. Fined €1 million a day.
Yes.
The country is still being fined €1 million a day. This new guy, Meagher, he is not going to just go, yeah, fine, we'll take down the fence. Come on in, the water's lovely. I don't believe for a moment he's going to do that, because that is not what the Hungarian people want. But anyway, we shall see. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Let's talk about the small matter of the war in the Middle East. Can't believe that's down to my third item today. But Donald Trump has basically said, look, we know these talks, 21 hours of talks. J.D. Vance flew back out of Islamabad in Pakistan. Well, no, that's not happening. And basically said, the Iranians are under illusions about how many cards they hold and what their strength of their position. I'm of the view the Iranians are in a very strong position, because if you ain't a democracy, you're able to stand up to democracy simply by holding out. That's all they need to do. But they are still basically holding international shipping and the world's oil markets to ransom by keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed to anything but Iranian exports to their allies or ships that are paying an extra fee, China, India, others. Now, we're told by Donald Trump there's going to be a blockade of the port of Iranian ports, Iranian ships coming out of Iranian ports. Other ships will be able to come through if Iran lets them through, from 3 o'clock today UK time. So basically, fine, you want to close the straits? Then it's completely closed. Now, Iran, I hadn't realised until today, Iran is still getting the same amount of income, in fact, more income, because they've been able to charge more for oil exports throughout this period because they can choose to let boats through. So we're told the Straits is completely mined. Well, clearly not, because they know a route through. Do you think it's likely that America could win on this front, or do you think that Iran still holds all the cards?
It depends what Donald Trump is actually prepared to do, because a blockade means sinking things. It means blowing things up, and that means Chinese ships. Is Donald Trump actually prepared to sink Chinese vessels? And, it's a different thing to Russia, seizing a Russian-marked tanker that's come from Venezuela.
Do they need to blow things up? Can you just not simply stop the ship and board the ship?
How do you stop at the ship and board the ship if, say, it's got armed guards on board? That means ultimately then you'll be engaging with a firefight on an oil tanker. That's what this means. But
there's been a lot of talk about how this is a game of 4D chess. I don't think by Donald Trump, maybe by some people in the Pentagon or the White House, which is that you're cutting off the oil supplies for China. And that actually the long-term benefits of this for the world, for the Western democracies, is a good thing, even if we take pain now. But he's not going to say it explicitly. Who knows? I tend not to ascribe that level of ability to politicians, because they seem to not be up to this sort of stuff.
I suppose it depends on what angle it is you're taking in terms of the long-term benefit. China can get energy from elsewhere if it wants to. The prices will go up, but China is now the 4th largest oil producer in the world off its own back, because it's seen this coming down the line.
It's almost like they do long-term planning.
Yeah, they do. If we're talking, though, about Iran, lots of people are talking about how this is a disaster, and let's be clear, it's not great. But let's think about what the alternative was. The alternative was Iran with nuclear weapons able to do this the whole time. It was able to do this the whole time. Once it gets nuclear weapons, it would have been able to do this, and nobody would have dared try to stop them, because they've got nuclear weapons. And this is why it's so frustrating when you hear UN experts and all this saying, oh, but they hadn't reached this level of enrichment and all this. And you think, well, why would you wait until they'd reached that level? The whole point is you stop them getting close to getting the weapons, not you wait till the last minute and then you go, oh, well, diplomacy has failed, now we do it. That's actually my biggest gripe with all of this, is that this was going to happen at some point, because Iran refuses to accept it can't have nuclear weapons, and it refuses to accept Israel exists. Israel has nuclear weapons and said we'll use them before they get them.
But only on a defensive basis.
Well,
no, I'm not remotely worried about Israel having nuclear weapons. I'm really pleased Israel's got nuclear weapons.
But
I think we're safer.
But the other thing to think about this is, let's say, hypothetically, Iran gets them but says, don't worry, guys, we won't use them. Nobody's going to believe them. So Saudi Arabia would then get them, Turkey would then get them, Egypt would then get them, other smaller nations that can get them would, so Azerbaijan would get them, but even smaller nations that couldn't get nuclear weapons, that are threatened by those countries, would go, right, we can't do that, so what do we make? Sarin gas is really cheap, and you can put that on drones. Yeah, that's the way to think about this.
Wow, happy Monday, everybody. It's one of those days.
You're stopping that kind of proliferation by stopping them getting the bomb in the
they're
first
a threat.
place.
I mean, again, they've said they're a threat. I definitely consider this to be a defensive, not an offensive war, that's for sure. Love to hear your thoughts on that as well. 0344 499 1000. There's so much more to talk about, including the risk of fuel protests here, the cost of living. We're going to be talking about that with Liam Halligan a little bit later in the show, because, Jen, forget just fuel. We keep talking about the oil. It's everything else. It's the fertiliser. It's the, helium, it's plastic. It's the amount of stuff. We are completely reliant on this strait being open. The impact of this is going to be huge. But let's talk about something really important.
Okay.
School meals, school lunches. My most vivid memory about school lunches is pink custard. They called it strawberry custard. It did no way have a flavour. It was just coloured pink. And by the time you got to the dessert, it always had a skin on it. And literally to this day, it's like, ooh. I struggle. I really struggle.
It was a slow-moving solid rather than a liquid, wasn't it?
exactly. My husband thinks that the entire world would be made a better place if everyone just had custard with every meal. He doesn't say that glibly. He would go on Question Time and argue that point. But school lunches are said to be made healthier, we are told. But when you actually see the details of this, there's not... I've got to be honest with you, it's not that convincing. But it's about, they'll move to, you're only having fish and chips. They say, we'd only have fried food once a week, but chips twice a week, and desserts, but they have to have to be low, no sugar, and they have to be half fruit and the like. And I think, I'm all in favour of school lunches getting healthier. And apparently a lot of schools now don't allow their kids out, basically, to maraud in the local high street because people are going, can you keep your chicken shop kids back in school, get behind school gates? Because they're all just basically going to get chips and burgers. But they say this is going to help solve obesity. I mean, these kids ain't getting fat because of what they're eating at school, are they?
I don't think it's entirely to do with that, although I think it probably doesn't help. But you're right. Actually, changing school meals alone isn't going to tackle the obesity. But broadly speaking, this is one of those difficult things that I have when it comes to, because I'm a big believer in sort of parental responsibility. But I think fundamentally there are many aspects of parenting in this country for a great many people that are just broken. And at some point, the state then needs to step in, because you're not going to fix that in a short period of time, if nothing else, because you can't re-educate the parents. So I do think is a good start. Teaching children to cook would be a great start, because if their parents can't and aren't feeding them properly, well, they're not going to teach that to their children, so you don't break the cycle.
And you're on the third generation of that as well. But I just simply don't accept the whole, people are just too busy, they're working too hard. Okay, I know women aren't 1950s housewives anymore, cooking all day. Of course not. But, I mean, give me a break. Especially, and you can have a healthy meal with a microwave. I'm sorry, you absolutely can. It's just absurd. No, it's an abject failure of parenting. But I have to say, you look at some of the food going on in school lunches, but they're going to be required to have vegetables and salad with every dish. Let's be honest, that's just a lot of waste. And although it doesn't cost more, well, when the kids ain't eating it, it does end up costing more. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Remembering your favourite school lunches, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We want to hear particularly from you on yet another attempt at Brexit betrayal by Keir Starmer. Get in touch and we'll get your calls up next. This is Talk.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He is not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot. He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:29 is the time. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000 to get in touch, particularly about what a surprise Keir Starmer's Brexit betrayal. Let's go to Caroline in London. Good morning to you, Caroline.
Oh, good morning, lovely Julia. Oh, Julia, where do I start? We are, this is in my opinion, we are living in a totalitarian communist state.
Ooh.
This man, what he is doing to this country, if you wanted to destroy a country, Keir Starmer's doing it brilliantly. It's absolutely appalling. We had a referendum, the first one in God knows how many years. We have no say. The British people have no say with what they do with our money, with what they do, like with the EU. Councils spend our money like water.
Yep.
They do consultations. They ignore us.
Yep.
Sadiq Khan does what he wants in London, 20 miles an hour. I'm really worried about even driving now because I can't drive my car at 20 miles. It doesn't work.
You spend the entire time looking, I mean, on a main road, different, on a little side road or out near the school. You spend the whole time literally putting the brake on to stop your car from going faster, and you're not looking at the road, which I think makes it more dangerous.
Absolutely. So I feel like our freedom has gone. I feel we're in a prison. What I don't understand, and I don't have the answer how, why are the British people not saying no in masses? Because this can't carry on. I mean, people are going to die in the winter from cold. People are going to either starve to death or there's going to be mayhem.
I don't think people are going to starve to death, but certainly we know people die because they're too afraid to put their heating on, and that's because the cost of fuel, and that's a direct result not of Ukraine war, not of the Iran war, but of our mad net zero policies. I mean, yeah, that's absolutely true. There's talk about fuel protests. We've had them in Northern Ireland. They've had to send the police out onto the street, pepper spraying people and that. Do you think we're likely to get fuel protests here? People are going to just get on the street and say we're had enough?
I don't know what's going on here in London, because I think a lot of people have been brainwashed, with the Green Party and all this kind of stuff. I don't understand what is happening in this country, and we're joining the EU that is literally collapsing. We're making our only ally our enemy, and we are in a really dark place. And on top of that, Julia, we've got all the breakup of the right with Reform, Restore, Ben Habib. And, what is going to happen in the next election? It is terrifying. I'm even thinking about selling my property. I'm just terrified. And I love talk, but every day I get more down because every day there's something bigger. Yeah. But this Prime Minister, and I don't actually think he's doing it, Julia. I don't think he's bright enough. He's doing it from the powers above. This has all been...
We're into full conspiracy. Look, he definitely was always planning to do this. I can tell you that in terms of Brexit betrayal, that's for sure. Caroline, a very, very downhearted call. I'm an eternal optimist. I feel the same concerns as you, but I'm an eternal optimist and that we will improve. We're a great country with a great history. We will have a great future as well. I'm absolutely determined to be a part of that as well. Caroline, thank you for your call. Bob is in Warrington. Bob, what do you make of it all?
Hi, Julia. Hello. Yeah, thanks for taking the call. Yeah, basically, I don't think anyone's looked at this too closely, but I have. If you look at 10 years before we joined the EU, from GDP data that's available to anybody, the annual growth rates were averaging over the 10-year period 3.5 to 3.6%.
1960s, though, bit different.
Yeah, well, 63, 70. But however, we had an average growth rate of 3.5, 3.6. Now then, when we joined the EU, we basically had a much reduced growth rate of 1.5 to 1.7 per year, which, if you then look over the decade, our growth rate over the 10 years before we joined the EU was basically, 40 to 42% over the decade. After we joined the EU, it was 15 to 18%.
But again, how much of that is correlation, like what happened in the 70s again with an oil spike, and in the mid-70s and, going hand in hand to the other. Lots of other things happen as well. And also economies that are coming out of a war will have more growth. And, there's lots of different things.
I agree. I mean, but it's worth looking at the factors for that. I think there was certainly a lot of benefits to the EU, the European Union as a whole, other than Great Britain, in my opinion.
Yeah, but also the main thing is, why would we want to go back into the EU, or even just align ourselves to the EU? The whole point is we've not taken any of the benefits of Brexit yet. And again, small point, lockdown, the Ukraine war and everything. We've been busy with other stuff. But the reality is, we're talking about an economy that, although it's still a large economy, is basically not going to grow anything like the other economies. America, everywhere in Asia, China and India, Africa as well. in the future, we're going to align ourselves with basically a dead weight with the EU rules.
I agree. And if we look at the carbon Ed Miliband
all that nonsense,
effect, all that makes it a lot worse. And one thing I wanted to say was about Ed Miliband's policy. He actually increases climate change by his policy.
Yes.
Because when you import all these fuels, and a lot of people don't talk about this on the mainstream media, there's a lot more CO being produced travelling to the UK with it, or travelling to Europe with it. rather than using it locally.
Yeah, and it's more expensive to convert gas into liquefied natural gas, and then, you say, transport it on a oil-powered cargo vessel to get here, and then you use far more energy, and it costs more. I know, it's almost like, Bob, they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, we need to sort of get that point over to people like Ed Miliband, who's actually, if we removed him out of position and give him another job, like in the arts or something, then it would actually help save the planet, because he pushes on that one all the time, yet he's making it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Bob. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to talk to a former Labour Special Advisor, Kevin Meagher, about this Brexit betrayal and what else is happening. And we're going to be talking to Andrew Fox about this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Is that going to bring Iran back to the table? That's all coming up. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:37 is the time. Let's go straight to my next guest, Kevin Meagher. He's a former Labour Special Advisor and joins us to talk about, well, completely predictable Brexit betrayal by Keir Starmer. Good morning to you, Kevin.
Morning, Julia.
Thanks so much for joining us. Just for those who are just tuning in, front page, a lot of the papers, mostly I would say the Brexit supporting papers, accusing Labour of a Brexit betrayal, plotting to deny MPs a vote on what they say the new EU sellout. That's one of the headlines. So basically, this is going to be a bill that's going to be in the King's Speech in May, and basically it's going to bring in statutory instrument Henry VIII powers, they're often called, basically allowing ministers to approve laws without full scrutiny. So it will basically be a statutory instrument. It will basically bring in secondary legislation that, although it's going to be voted on for or against, no amendments. And then after that point, ministers are going to be able to sign up to any new EU laws, not ones we already know about, anything they change in the future, new regulations, and we'll just sign up to them without Parliament, without MPs, without the people getting a say. Understandably, people are calling this a Brexit betrayal and a sellout. Do you agree?
Not really. I think in terms of Brexit betrayal, I think there's a lot of that to go around it, probably starting with Boris Johnson and his Boris wave. So what Keir Starmer's trying to do is to, as he calls it, is reset with the European Union, put things on a better footing. And we've got to still be very mindful that 41% of our exports go to the European Union and 50% of our imports come from the European Union. So we're going to have a close working relationship with them. And of course, that's been catalysed, if you like, even further with what's going on in the world and Donald Trump's behaviour and all the rest of it. So Europe is looking to work collaboratively where it can on a whole number of fronts. Now, what Keir Starmer's trying to do here, first of all, is get a deal around food, a so-called sanitary deal with the European Union about the exports, imports of food products, and a phytosanitary, these incredible terms, about plants and all the rest of it. So a lot of this is a lot of this is very complex and it's in the weeds. And what he's trying to do and what it will mean, you're quite right, the Henry VIII powers, the statutory instruments, you pass a piece of legislation and then it gives you ministers the power to tweak the rules and regulations.
Tweak.
Piece of legislation.
Basically, adopt EU rules as and when they're brought in.
Yes, it's not an ideal way of governing, and lots
not an ideal, but a completely undemocratic way of governing.
Well, every government does it though. Every government
does it. And they shouldn't.
We came out of the European Union using precisely these powers as well, these instruments as well. well. Now, it's not ideal, but what Starmer's saying is, look, on a case-by-case basis, on an industry or a sector-by-sector basis, we will look at another terrible phrase, dynamic alignment with the European Union single market. Now, this is the kind of stuff that big companies, particularly, and industries are lobbying government ministers for all the time, because they're part of European supply chains. They're doing a lot of business in Europe, and they want certainty that the British policy approach is aligned.
And dynamic alignment is that not only aligning today, but when the EU laws change in the future, we carry on changing with them. What on earth was the point of the British people voting to leave the EU so we didn't have to abide by EU rules, particularly, by the way, given that most of our companies do not export to the EU, they're still going to be impacted by those rules. What was the point of us voting for that if it's going to be undermined by Keir Starmer was elected as a democratically elected Prime Minister. And yes, there'll be a vote in Parliament and he has a majority of MPs and he can do that. But he's using that democratic mandate to basically undemocratise their decisions. What was the point of 2016 referendum if he can just do this?
Well, I mean, it's a fair point, and you could have asked that point at any stage over the last 10 years, given the state of immigration in this country. That was a principle. No, as a principle, lots of people voted to get out of the European Union.
No, but Kevin, you missed the point. The Boris wave was a betrayal by Boris Johnson.
Yes.
But here's the thing, and he was punished for it.
He was, absolutely.
And the Tories were punished for it. Why? Because it was his choice, and he, unlike every government before, could say, well, what can we do? We're in the EU. We can't stop people coming to the country. Yes, you can. You made a deliberate decision to import people from the Indian subcontinent and from West Africa en masse, and we will punish you for it. And that's what the whole point of Brexit was: democratic accountability.
Absolutely. Keir Starmer's taking a chance. He's taking a risk. He's saying, look, I put in my manifesto to the British public 18 months ago that we would have a reset with the European Union. Now, he's elliptical about exactly what that meant. He said, I'm not going to rejoin the single market. We're not going to rejoin the custom union. And this is strictly holding to that pledge. Now, if this is, if you're a voter and this is your big bugbear and you see this as a Brexit betrayal, then Keir Starmer is saying, well, you're going to have to take it out on me at the 2029 general election. Now, he hopes by then that what this will have done is help to galvanise the British economy, provide more growth. By the time that election drops in 2029, the country's in a better position than it is today. That's the gamble he's taking.
The future of Britain's economy is going to rest on more trade with other economies that are also facing the same problem as us, which is they've got mad net zero policies, they've got unaffordable energy costs and insane regulation, and they're not dynamic as well. Yeah, that's the future. I mean, this is crazy. The key thing here is that Keir Starmer's on a technicality. He's going to stick to his manifesto pledge, like on the technicality, I'm not going to raise national insurance for workers. You're going to raise it on the employers, which means the workers are impacted anyway. The thing is, the voters aren't going to play along with these rinky-dink little things. They know when they're being sold a dud, and they know when they're being lied to. Keir Starmer spent 3 years to 2019 trying to undermine the biggest democratic vote for anything ever in this country. Pretended he was going to in 2024 that he was going to stand by it. This was always the plan. He reckons, look, unless the man is utterly delusional, he doesn't think he's going to get a second term in office, in which case he'd be lucky to survive past May. In which case, if he can get us basically back, wink, 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 nudge, nudge, into the EU, he'll have done his bit for the Islington dinner party set, whose approval he desperately wants. He'll guarantee himself some nice future job via the EU or something, some international role. That's what he's trying to do. And he's going to sell the British people down the river to do it.
I mean, the calculation he's making is, look, if this helps to generate growth at all, then that is a price worth paying. And the people who are lobbying him,
drop net zero, be quicker.
Well, the people that are lobbying government ministers all the time to sort of say we need to keep in dynamic alignment with the European Union are the big companies and the big industries in this country that employ hundreds
who lobbied the same thing in 2016 and lost that vote.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, it's always a balance. Now he will pay if national sovereignty in this very narrow sense is your thing, then you're not going to vote Labour in 2029.
Yeah, democracy is my thing. You're either a Democrat
if the
or you're not.
Economy grows as a result of a closer working, practical, rational working relationship with the European Union, then a lot of people will say, fair enough.
Well, no, but again, economics was the main argument of the Remain campaign, and people went, you know what, it's not just about economics, it is about community, and it is about democratic accountability, it is about national sovereignty. That argument didn't work last time, it ain't going to work this time. If he wants to have a referendum, be honest about it, let's have a referendum, let's have a straight fight, because they know perfectly well they would lose that fight. Forget all the polls and what their mates, their dinner parties think. I'm telling you that categorically right now. But here's the thing. I mean, if you want to have a good relationship with the EU, that depends on the EU not trying to give us a punishment beating us. They've done with Northern Ireland, more checks on goods going on going in the Irish Sea than there are coming in on the eastern borders. Yeah. They've been trying to punish us. He said that if we just sat down with Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen, then we could sort out the Channel migrant boats. How's that working out for you? I'm sorry, they don't want to have a good relationship. They want to punish us for daring to vote, and they want to punish the political class here for allowing us to have the vote and then outrageously enacting that vote, because when other countries have voted on to leave the EU or to not obey new rules, they've always basically been sort of brushed under the carpet and they've just told to vote again or just ignored. So this is a two-way street. The EU is not going to give up. They want to nationally humiliate us, to say, don't anyone else think about doing this, because we're going to make damn sure that you're punished and no one else will do it. That's what this is about.
Well, I mean, just on the Northern Ireland point, it's quite interesting, because the deal that's being currently negotiated, as I say, around sanitary and phytosanitary products, will get rid of the need for the Windsor Framework, for example, in Northern Ireland. That'll address that problem directly and should take care of the guts of the issue.
Because we'll all be back under EU rules.
We can't weigh anchor and move further to America or anywhere else in the world. We've got our neighbours where they are. But physically, I don't think we can. I don't think physically we can do that.
Our trade.
But look, 41% still going to the EU. It's in our rational self-interest to make this relationship.
Is it in the rational self-interest of the EU?
What Starmer's trying to do.
Is it in the rational self-interest of the EU to force Brits and Americans and others travelling into the EU to basically spend 3 hours in a passport queue for their biometrics?
That's not a great scenario. That's fair
what they've been doing this Easter to people.
That's a price of leaving the European Union, I'm afraid. And this is the point. We're not.
Is it rational of them? No. Is it rational of them to do that to people who want to come and spend money in their countries?
Well, I wouldn't do it. If I was them, I'd find a better deal. But we
should ally ourselves with these people.
We are where we are because the Tories got us a lousy Brexit deal. That's the top and bottom.
No.
Because
the
Remainers went in with the blinkers.
The Remainers who refused to accept to accept the democratic vote undermined the negotiating position. Theresa May signed up to God knows what. The civil service blob and everybody combined tried to stop a decent deal happening, and Keir Starmer is responsible for that deal as anyone else. Boris Johnson, I don't hold a candle for that man. He had to pick up the pieces of what was left.
Look, my view on Brexit is that you've got to respect. There's a decision of the British public, and I would never have called for a second referendum or anything like that. But we've had 10 years of the dog ate my homework excuses from people on the political.
We haven't we only left in 21.
If it had only been this, if we could have only done that, if we could have been Singapore on sea, if we could have just deregulated this.
Well, we didn't. But we didn't.
Marvellous. We didn't because it was a bad deal from the start. And it got progressively worse. And Keir Starmer's role, it would seem in British politics, is to be the great political janitor of our age, moving around with his mop and bucket, everybody else's mess.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's spilling that bucket everywhere, and it ain't just water in it. Kevin Marr, great to talk to you, mate. Former Labour Social Advisor Kevin Marr, thank you very much. Benedict Spence, listening to all that, his face has been a picture throughout. What do you want to say?
It's actually just the mental image of him as a janitor.
His father was a toolmaker.
Just this attitude, though, that this is the only solution, this is the only way forward, and that it was a bad deal. OK, it wasn't a great deal, but it was a good deal given the circumstances that we got, and it gave us a platform to start working with. It's not our fault that our political elite, which were the ones we wanted to change ultimately, don't have the vision actually to proceed with that, and of course things like COVID and Ukraine happening on top of that. But when people sort of take this attitude, which is, well, it's inevitable that we're going to be chained to Europe, we're just going to have to be sucked in because of geography. Does that mean Japan should just join China because it's there? That's not how this works.
Such a ridiculous argument, isn't it? And the idea that they could trade with another country, you have to basically align all your laws. I mean, it's mad and have free movement. That's what they want. They just want their own sodding kids to be able to go and hang out in Milan. That's what they want. 10:49 is the time. Up next, going to talk about the thing that's really impacting our economy. And no, it's not the Brexit deal. It is what is going on in Iran and the abject madness of what is going on in the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to talk to Andrew Fox of the Henry Jackson Society about that up next. Stay tuned.
Credit Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He is not the statesman that our country needs. He is failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:52 is the time. This is Talk. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's talk about what is going on in the Middle East. Seriously, what is going on in the Middle East? Let's ask Andrew Fox. He's a former major in the Parachute Regiment. He's also Senior Associate Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society and a friend of the show. A very, very good morning to you, Andrew.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Look, we've the latest development. We had these talks, 2-week ceasefire. We had these talks starting 21 hours later. J.D. Vance flies back home to the States saying, yeah, basically, it's not working. Iranians won't agree to give up their attempt to get nuclear capability. The Iranians still blockading the Strait of Hormuz and closing it back to any ship but their own, so the ones they've approved. Donald Trump says at 3 o'clock UK time today, the US are going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, I thought he was planning to open it rather than close it.
Look, I think this is in two parts. So the first thing they're doing is blockading any Iranian oil. So that's the blockade that America is going to impose on top of the Iranian blockade. And then part two is they're going to try and lift the Iranian blockade, if that makes sense. Yeah. So what we'll see is probably operations to try and get the strait clear. And then the Americans will control which ships go in and out. So they're essentially replacing the Iranian blockade with an American one.
And it's clearly not mined in such a dangerous way that ships can't get out, because ships are getting out.
And they have been throughout the war, but only the ones that Iran agrees to. And look, this is the crux of the whole issue, is Iran don't actually have to do anything other than threaten the Strait of Hormuz, because it's about insurance prices for tankers. It's about making it too risky. They don't actually need to do anything at all. And so we've seen ships going through. We saw 2 American frigates getting through just yesterday. So, it looks relatively clear, but, if you're insuring an oil tanker worth millions of pounds, you're going to want more assurances than that. And that's what I suspect America will try and do over the next days and weeks. But it's not an easy or quick operation, and it won't be over fast.
And I think a lot of us are still utterly befuddled that this wasn't something that the Americans could foresee as was a likely action. But as my guest Benedict Spence pointed out a bit earlier, imagine Iran doing this whilst already having nuclear weapons, no one will be able to take any action whatsoever at all. What do you make in terms of the where we are in terms of ceasefire talks? Was this all for show? Many people are saying, look, this is just playing for time. This is just all for show, waiting for America to do something else. Or do you think that actually Iranians do have a lot more cards than the Americans would like to think, because they can play the waiting game? They're not bothered. They're not worried about democratic, fallout in November.
Exactly. The Iranian response here is probably nothing, because they don't have to do anything. The ticking clock here is the global economy. It's not just oil, it's not just gas, it's things like helium, which you need to build chips that go in your phone or your laptop. It's things that go towards making fertilizer. We're potentially looking at famine in areas of the world because fertilizer supplies aren't getting through the Strait of Hormuz.
It's 50% of the fossil fuels used for fertilizer in the world go through the Strait. I mean, these are extraordinary numbers.
Yeah, and it's we're talking genuinely starvation, and so that pressure and that ticking clock, as American prices continue to rise. The Trump narrative that actually America doesn't use the Strait, it's other countries' problem. It just isn't true, because a global price rise is exactly that, and it will hit Americans perhaps less hard than other countries, but certainly will hit them.
Yeah.
And that will have a knock-on effect at the ballot box.
And there's a lot of talk that actually, even if the Strait was reopened now, we've still got that backlog. We've got the damaged oil production facilities. We've got the backlog of all these tankers, and currently, basically, most countries are surviving on their stores, on their but when we actually get to the end of those, then we could still be facing, short of, jet fuel. Michael O'Leary of Ryanair said, we could see 5 to 10% of all flights cancelled in Europe, just simply do not have the fuel for them. And as you say, the serious concerns in developing countries of the lack of fertiliser to grow food. These are major concerns. I mean, is there any evidence that the Americans sort of foresaw all of this? Because there's a bit of a worry that if the mad mullahs in Iran have got a longer game and are playing better tactics than the Americans, or did Donald Trump just think, we've got the firepower, job done, and it's going to be another Venezuela, we're going to kill the Ayatollah, someone half sane is going to take over, job done, and it's all over?
Yeah, I would, looking at the facts that we have, I would say that is the most likely. I think they probably rushed the start of the war. There was that opportunity to strike the entire Iranian leadership at once. That obviously took place before they had the naval equipment in place to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, but they took a gamble, and unfortunately it hasn't paid off. And I think it goes back to the first half of the question you asked me a moment ago, and that is, you have to understand the psychology of the people you're dealing with. These are not rational actors. It's very much like Hamas in Gaza or Hezbollah in Lebanon. Like, they don't know they're beaten because they are ideological, and they are happy to fight to the very last fighter.
Yeah. They're not worried about their people, facing economic worries or being killed. They don't care.
Not at all. And look, they see this almost as a rite of passage. Their religious worldview is that this suffering has to happen as part of the journey to getting the Mahdi back and taking over the world as an Islamic caliphate. They are framing this in a completely different and alien way to how we think about it. So the idea that you can just bomb them to submission, it's a non-starter. They just don't think that way.
That is the concern.
Until you understand this, you don't get a solution.
What do you make of Keir Starmer, who hilariously the Labour Party are trying to play as this this great statesman of the world? I mean, as I wrote in The Sun last week, he's like, he's the pink blancmange on the diplomacy buffet table. I mean, he's saying, like, very clearly, Britain is not going to get involved in America blockading the Strait, but that we will be involved in some minesweeping work. Although, of course, our minesweeper left Bahrain before this war started, so the one nearby ain't actually there. Is that the right decision?
I mean, I still agree that we shouldn't have gotten involved militarily in this one.
Should we have allowed our bases to be used?
I think it's a question that doesn't have a right answer. I mean, I think we were using the basis for defensive stuff of our own. The Americans have made it very clear their position towards NATO and the UK. I think on one hand, there's a political message to send by saying no. On the other, it is useful if the Iranian regime don't get nuclear weapons, and so I firmly support the idea of bombing them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tricky, but look, minesweepers are important. Minesweepers are something we provide, and that's what we'll do.
Yeah. Well, war is messy, it turns out. Who knew, eh? Andrew Fox, someone who's actually fought in wars, would perhaps know that better than Donald Trump, who hasn't. 10:59 is the time we approach the top of the hour. I'm going to get Benedict Spence on that. We get a bit more time to have a proper chat. Lots more top guests to come. Going to talk more and get more of your calls about the Brexit betrayal by Keir Starmer. What a surprise on that, eh? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. Fast approaching 3 minutes past 11 o'clock. This is Talk. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and we are the home of Common Sense. So much to talk about today, whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lots to talk about. Benedict Spence, delighted to say, Conservative commentator, is joining us, as he regularly does, on a Monday. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm going to give you a chance to have your say back on where we are in terms of Iran after that conversation with Andrew Fox and about the latest efforts to try and get Iran to come to the table and have a serious negotiation by the United States. We'll be talking about that. Also talking a lot about the Labour Brexit betrayal. Hell surprise, everybody. Plans to sign Britain up to EU rules in the future without giving MPs a proper say. Basically, it's called King Henry VIII powers. We'll talk about that. Also, the Boris wave, a huge number of migrants allowed in under Boris Johnson's premiership. As one of my Labour guests pointed out, it was a terrible betrayal of Brexit voters, and absolutely it was. But that's costing British households, according to Reform UK analysis, £20,000 each over basically the amount of benefits and cost to the society they're going to have over the years. Plus, middle-class households facing that hit this year from the Iran war and inflation. Benefit-dependent families, what a surprise, gaining from, scrapping the two-child benefit cap and benefits going up. We've been talking about this, but now let's talk about actual, fuel protests on the streets, as we've seen in Northern Ireland already. Is that going to happen on the streets of the UK? We are told by all the economic experts that, we ain't seen nothing yet in terms of the economic impact of that war in Iran. Plus, we're going to be talking about the striking doctors who've dismissed a meeting with Health Secretary Wes Streeting as a waste of time. And what a surprise, a left-wing Blairite think tank, IPPR, has issued a new report today basically saying that moving the NHS to the social insurance model used in pretty much every other Western nation in the world wouldn't actually improve our healthcare outcomes, even though our healthcare outcomes are among the worst in the world for the amount of money we spend. But obviously, it can't just be because it's the NHS, eh? Anyway, we'll talk about all of that, plenty more besides. As I say, Benedict Spence is joining me. I want to hear from you on Brexit, but let me just tell you where we are on that. Labour, according to all the front pages of the Brexit supporting papers, is basically accused of another Brexit betrayal. What is it this time? Oh, it's not just food and agricultural rules and aligning with those. The under-30s free movement plan, which the Prime Minister is still standing up to, spending billions getting us back into that student exchange scheme, effectively Erasmus, but paying a fortune more than EU countries pay. This is all about bringing a new law into existence. A bill will be announced in the King's Speech in early May, and this legislation will bring forward what's called basically a statutory instrument. We heard a lot about these, didn't we, before Brexit? And basically there'll be a vote in Parliament. Of course, Ramona Labour MPs will happily vote this through, and this will give ministers the powers to, in future, change the law when it comes to regulations of food and agricultural goods that those could be exported or not exported, but particularly to the EU, to align them with not just EU rules now, but any future EU rules. It's called dynamic alignment. But there won't be a vote in Parliament to change the rules. There won't be any discussion, nothing in the media, nothing. They'll just quietly change because they'll be able to do that legally because they'll be given that power. Now, this bill can't be amended. It can't be changed in any way. So it's either a for or against. And we know that Labour will have the votes to get that through. It is, in every sense, a betrayal of Brexit. But we always knew he was going to do that. He said he wouldn't take us back into the single market of the customs union. But that's because there's no way in the world that he could go with a manifesto in 2024 and promise anything different. But he's taking us in by the back door. We're going to be a rule taker, not a rule maker. And then the argument will be, we may as well be one of the rule makers and go back in. And that's what they'll want to do, and they'll try and do that without a referendum as well. What is your thoughts on this? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text us on 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls to charge at a national rating. Text cost one standard network rate message. Benedict Spence, actually, I'll talk to you about this first, and then I'll talk to you about the Iran. Because, again, it's all related. Because we're constantly told, we haven't had the benefits of Brexit. There's been such an economic cost. Brexit happened in 2021 after all the fighting, and we had to wait. We could have had a great Brexit deal in 2017, 2018, but basically we went through all of the trauma because Ramonas like Keir Starmer tried to stop it from happening. So we eventually get Brexit in the middle of a global pandemic, in the middle of lockdown, and what a surprise. We ain't seen any economic benefits. We just started coming out. We had the Ukraine war. Just started maybe thinking about getting better. And then we're going to have the Iran conflict. It's going to be a massive economic impact. But we're constantly told all of our woes are to do with the EU and a few companies having to fill out some extra sodding paperwork when they export.
Yes, it's one of those things where it is very difficult actually to sort of extrapolate from all the data what has and hasn't happened. But everybody who's sort of vaguely reasonable or rational about this, every economist who doesn't sort of come into it with an ideological bent, agrees that Brexit has been a minor net negative. And when you step back and you say, so what has Brexit actually entailed? And you see, we haven't actually changed an awful lot about this country since then. We've just sort of sat on our own and gone, how about that? We've put up a few trade barriers, we've made things a little bit more difficult for ourselves, and not actually done any of the other things that we said we would do. Which was the point. Then you're kind of like, well, yes, the sky hasn't fallen in, things haven't massively improved because we haven't really done anything, is the odd thing. We've got the deal and then just assumed, things would magically get better. And now, as you say, also, we've gone through I wouldn't say unprecedented period of upheaval, but a rather unusual, given the previous sort of 20, 30 years, moment in time where lots of things sort of coalesced at once. And that, of course, does skew the data. And it's very unfortunate, therefore, that lots of people who are you know, they are still absolutely driven insane by this topic. Take things like these various wars or the pandemic, and they go, well, I can massively happily throw this in and say that this means that Brexit has failed.
Yeah,
and it's very
so
frustrating
painful.
that we have not actually... What I would say is it says a lot about great swathes of our society that we have been unable to move on, or those people at least have been unable to move on
Well, they say
from that side of the
they say
conversation.
people like us are obsessed with it. I've been told you're obsessed. No, I thought we just got on, we just move on. They're the ones who were obsessed with it for the following 3 years after the referendum result, who fought it, who were still trying to take us back in by the back door. Now,
yes.
If they want another EU referendum, you want to waste our time with that? Bring it on, we'll win. The EU will take the mix something rotten. They'll offer us terms where we're paying sort of twice as much in. We won't have the Thatcher rebate,
yes.
Which by the way we never used to get back years later. Paying an absolute fortune to basically ally. We have to get rid of our deals we've got with other countries around the world. We will basically have to sort of basically tie ourselves onto the sinking ship of the world economy.
Yes.
It's insane.
The odd thing is, actually,
People aren't going to vote for that.
Brexit actually came at an oddly fortuitous moment, because it meant that we would have been, or should have been able to respond to all of these various crises without being shackled to Europe.
Yeah.
The great tragedy is we just decided, for the most part, to go along with business as usual and not actually do anything different. We were given
vaccines,
if you want to say
COVID vaccines.
well, that's certainly true. That's one thing. But let's be clear: if God is an Englishman,
I know a lot of my audience have differing views on these things.
but if God is an Englishman, he's sat up there on a cloud, absolutely gnashing his teeth, going, "What's wrong with these people? They have the opportunity to disalign themselves from everything else that's going on, and they're choosing to make their lives more difficult."
Yep.
I think that is the great frustration about the UK in this current moment. The opportunity to not struggle is there. The country, those that run it, and many of its voters choose actively to embrace the suffering. If anything, they think we haven't quite had enough.
Yeah, I know. This is the really painful thing, isn't it? But it's very interesting because one of our previous guests mentioned the Boris wave. And right now at Reform UK are holding a press conference. Nigel Farage and his Home Affairs spokesman Zia Youssef, they're speaking about the true cost of the Boris wave. And they are saying that the immigration Boris wave, 1.6 million people who moved to the UK under Boris Johnson between 21 and 24. I mean, it was just off the scale, the number of people. It's going to cost every British household £20,000. Their reports said the cost of NHS care, benefits, new infrastructure to cope with the increased population would mean that would basically cost us that liability for every single household. It's 3 times the annual budget of the NHS in total, £622 billion, 10 times the defence budget of £60 billion. And that's the thing, we were told this lie for years, that immigration was really good for the economy. Yeah, if you want to import some German bankers and some American sort of tech entrepreneurs, absolutely, please come, spend your money, pay your taxes, thank you very much. But the idea that people with literally no skills, no qualifications whatsoever, who barely speak English, coming from the third world, are a benefit to us, doing jobs which, I'm sorry, I've got an aunt in a care home. The care workers there are amazing. They are wonderful. They are wonderful people. It's a job, me and Zach Lansky, we don't want to do that job, not very good at it. But it's not worthwhile work, but it's not well paid work, and it never is going to be well paid work. And I'm sorry, but the net cost of those people and their families, number of children, is on us. Interestingly, about Nigel Farage, he just has addressed this Brexit betrayal issue at this press conference as well. We are fully into local election mode now, campaigning. He spoke about Keir Starmer and his Brexit betrayal and said the PM effectively wants to take us back into the single market. And I'm sorry, but that is what I, as a Brexit voter, suspect. I know that's what Keir Starmer wants to do.
Of course that's what he wants to do. That's the long-term plan. And the point is, once we're then fully in, great numbers of responsibilities that ostensibly would have been placed on MPs will no longer be their responsibilities. And this is why I say, and I do think it is as simple as this, lots of these people would quite like that life. That is what they want. They go to these top universities, and this is I'm afraid is the key tell. Lots of people who go to our top universities, and we have 4 of the top 10 universities in the world.
You have none, by the way.
0, yeah, not even Heidelberg, doesn't even make the top 20. Yeah, this is the thing. The real brain boxes and the high achievers do not in fact go and work in politics or even in policy in this country. So there are smart people there, but the best ones don't. Yeah. A lot of these people are people who, frankly, had probably quite a good time at Oxford and Cambridge, and they quite enjoyed the social aspect to it, but they were part of a certain social set, and that was the political one. And they just want a continuation of this because they think they've got the cheat code, and that is that membership of this group to which you can outsource all of these decisions means that they can continue this indefinitely.
I moved in that world, having been, and I can absolutely say that is exactly how they think. There's no doubt at all about that. And again, this is why they're not very good at sort of real world politics. Like, dealing with, a rogue Islamic State getting a nuclear weapon and what would one need to do about it. They want an easy life. These are the same people. We've seen this constantly with Keir Starmer in particular. I mean, Ed Davey's even worse on this, which is like, if you just talk to people, if you sit at the table with people, you can get them to come to a deal. Couldn't even sit at a table and come to a deal on dealing with Channel migrants, mate. That's how do you think you're going to deal when it comes to the Iran conflict? Well, we just found out that breaking news, very exciting. The UK and France are going to host a summit on dealing with the Strait of Hormuz. Oh, brilliant. Well, that's solved then, everybody. We were talking to Andrew Fox a little bit earlier. He's a regular on the show, and really good on Middle Eastern, stuff and what's going on with these Islamic regimes. But Donald Trump has been basically sort of playing chicken with the Iranians, and they're playing chicken back with him. They've still been using, although the Strait of Hormuz is closed to everybody else, they've still been able to get their oil out and the shipping, selling it at high price to China. They've been making the same money from their oil exports as they were making before the war, despite under sanctions. Same as Russia, despite under their sanctions. Funny, we're really rubbish at this stuff, aren't we? Americans have basically said, well, fine, we want to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, that's part of it. We are going to blockade your own ships until you reopen. Is that going to work on Iran? Because again, I'm sure a French-British summit ain't going to work. Is that going to work, or basically, are the Iranians willing to sit tight and hold tight until the pressure economically and voter pressure in America is going to force Donald Trump to pretend he's got a victory and leave?
You can't pretend you've got a victory and leave indefinitely, because at some point you're going to get dragged back in. Now that this war has started, it has to be finished one way or another. And I'm afraid to say, when I say one way or another, that has to mean the defeat of Iran. Because if it's not the defeat of Iran, that means a constant second war between Israel and Iran, in which perhaps Israel doesn't have the backing of a number of countries that it might otherwise want.
This regime,
but
so not the pretend regime change that Donald Trump's talking about, the actual regime needs to fall.
But it also will mean fundamentally the destabilisation of the rest of the Gulf region, because right now you've got Saudi Arabia and you've got the United Arab Emirates, and they've done fantastically well off the back of a sort of bizarre peace dividend in the Middle East for that particular part, plus oil, which has meant that they've been able to accrue an awful lot of power. But they don't actually have the resources or the population, certainly without the US military backing them, to face off against Iran, which, let's be clear, has huge amounts of revenue from oil and gas, bigger in some cases than these countries, but doesn't care about placating their own population. It doesn't put it towards, improving public transport or anything like that, which these countries actually do. It all goes towards weapons. That's partly why you have the protests in Iran, but then what happens? The regime uses the weapons against its people and it represses them. Yeah. You can't have that Iranian state with a nuclear weapon, because then it starts shaking down everyone else,
and that is where
funding goes towards other extremist groups
and as we've seen, Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis.
It's been fantastic in the Arabian Peninsula as it has stepped away from Islamic extremism. It has. There's no two ways about that. They're not Western countries, but they are not what they were 20 or 30 years ago.
They're looking at tourism and trade.
But look at the way actually that the UAE represses groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, because it understands full well that could take root in its states, and that's the same for any of these countries. Doesn't matter if it's Saudi or Oman or any of them, Kuwait.
So although they are repressive regimes, they know what they're repressing,
and they are
lunatics.
repressing the things that actually a lot of people in this country would quite like us to repress. The point is, if you give that entire region effectively over to Iran, and you say you can charge what you want for the Strait, we can't stop you because you got nukes, that means war with Israel, and it means all of those countries
but we also know, that they're now looking at they're going to have to build pipelines and other routes out for the oil, but again that makes it more expensive, it takes a lot of time. But we've already seen with the Houthi rebels firing the Suez. I mean, that was closed for a huge amount of time. I don't know if it even still is. I mean, it's just we cannot have rogue countries or rogue terrorist groups controlling shipping lanes. Now, the whole point of us having a big navy over the centuries we were an empire was that we controlled the world's shipping and trade routes. That is how you have economic power, and that's also how you have military. The military power helps you have the economic power, and the economic power allows you to have the military power. It's a two-way street. Now, America does do that, and at the end of the day, if America can't keep the Strait of Hormuz open, that says, hey, you ain't in charge. You're going to have to do it. So actually, this is about basic prowess of the Americans as well. This is about them not looking embarrassed. But who's going to blink first? That's the trouble. It is. Donald Trump is perfectly capable of just walking away and saying, we won, we destroyed their navy, their aircraft, blah, 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 blah. But, as you say, they'll have to come back again at some point. But also, my understanding is that, the Middle Eastern countries, Saudis and others are saying, hey, don't leave. We've now allied with you and with Israel. We want rid of this regime. We're done.
This is what I'm saying, is that actually if the United States pulls out and says, we're going to leave this as it is now, Iran effectively becomes the hegemon. And none of those countries can survive that. And that's why I said, and I did say this earlier on in the show, what you will then see is an arms race between a lot of these countries, because they will say, well, we can't let Iran be the hegemon, so we need our own insurance policy. That means those countries started to get nuclear weapons. A lot of them can afford that. Some of them can't, though. What will they then get? They won't spend billions developing nuclear weapons. They'll spend tens of millions on drones and nerve agents.
And one of the things we have learned, particularly from the Ukraine war, is actually you really, really don't need... And same with the Strait. They don't need to mine the whole Strait. They don't need to send massive ballistic missiles. They just need a little speedboat with some explosives on it, or a drone. And it is incredibly easy to disrupt the entire world's economy. Look, let's move on, because we know there's like a massive impact of that. And we know there's going to be, the impact hasn't even started to be felt. Either in the third world countries going to be worried about getting the fertiliser at the time within planting season, but also, but that's the world's food. The reason why we're able to feed 9 million people on this planet, I've lost track, billion, whatever, is because we've got fossil fuels creating artificial fertilisers, and that is why this is absolutely vital. But as our guests were saying a bit earlier, you've got, it's helium, it's so many other things that we absolutely rely on for our modern day life. And the impact of that hasn't, and the diesels, the aviation fuel, the impact of that has not been felt yet.
For a start, and this is a separate conversation, but it really should ram home the absurdity of net zero and how far away we are, even on our current trajectory. There is no way we'll reach it.
If we had more solar panels and wind turbines, sorry, I'm just channeling my inner Ed Miliband, we wouldn't have to rely on this, because apparently you can make fertiliser out of a wind turbine.
Although
Ed Miliband knows less about energy production and needs in this country than frankly this mug.
I mean, there are a few countries that could really benefit and become energy independent through solar power. One of them's Iran. So what does that say about its civilian nuclear program? It doesn't need a civilian nuclear program. It doesn't even need the solar panels, because it's got so many fossil fuels. But it's why you shouldn't take any of this nonsense at face value. And it's worth saying, actually, that's always the tell. When you have country, Egypt is another one. Egypt is currently building nuclear reactors. It doesn't need them. That's why it's doing it, though, because it's got one eye on saying, if we need to get ourselves into that position, how would we do it?
Absolutely.
We need power.
Let's also talk about things further closer to home. Reform UK press conference, as I said, with Nigel Farage and the Home Affairs spokesman Zia Youssef. They've been talking about the true cost of the Boris wave. Basically, Nigel Farage has been saying that there's no doubt at all his mind that Keir Starmer's trying to take us back into the EU single market. They've also announced, as I mentioned a bit earlier, they're talking about just how expensive the Boris wave has been cost, and how it's basically in total going to cost that extra 1.6 million people arriving largely from the Indian subcontinent, costing every family £20,000 in total because of the extra costs of healthcare benefits, new infrastructure to cope with all those extra people turning up. They've also announced, Youssef has announced, that a reform would abolish the immigration status of indefinite leave to remain, something that's been in the news very much later. So it was the situation, remember, where we got, currently you wait 5 years, you come here for work, you're on your visa, and after 5 years you can apply for indefinite leave to remain. Extraordinarily, it hasn't been a requirement that you speak English, that you're completely integrated, and that you're a net contributor. Most of the people applying are none of these things. We've got Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary. She's trying to make it a requirement that you have to be here 10 years beforehand. She's absolutely struggling with Labour backbenchers who basically, they're with Zach Polanski. Let's just have an open border policy. They shouldn't have to wait so long. They think this is a tough new reform. I think most of us will think this is a bare minimum reform. Tories said they would toughen up. Reform said they would abolish it altogether. They want to replace it with a 5-year renewable work visa with a special visa available to spouses of UK citizens, much higher salary threshold. Basically, you have to be a net contributor to the economy. So you're You ain't having people coming here on these visas to work in care homes. That would not be happening. A higher standard of English would be required. There'd also be an acute special skills visa available to those working in critical sectors like care. But that's happened before. So again, they say, yes. Special acute, special skills, and actually it's a load of people who have quite literally no pieces of paper in terms of the skills. But they're also going to immediately end all welfare payments to all foreign nationals living in Britain. That's a £9 billion saving in universal credit payments alone. I mean, I think a lot of us would support that. I mean, that is a massive, big change. There is a lot of money to be saved. And there's people, the left will say, oh, all these people, they'll have no money. No, they'll go home.
Yeah,
that's what, if you ran out of money and you were living abroad, you'd go home. That's what you'd do.
This is the thing, and it's so frustrating because hearing all of these things, especially from parties that were very recently in power, you think, OK, but why hasn't this happened already? Why was it ever allowed to be a situation where it was these incredibly lax rules? If you want your society to prosper, I'm sorry, sometimes that means saying no to people. Sometimes that means telling people this is not... Yeah, and we don't do it. We don't do it. And this is, I'm afraid, a failing of frankly, of democracy, is that in the mass rush to appeal to as many people as possible, people are promised things. And actually what is required is taking difficult decisions. Just saying yes to everybody because that's what polls well is not leadership. And we needed this years ago. And I have to say, actually, Nigel Farage is polling quite well now because it's only becoming clear decades later, the cost of these things. But actually what was required was politicians earlier on saying, this is just cooking the books,
and Boris
frankly.
Johnson's appalling betrayal. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. A lot of you getting in touch, phone lines so full on the Brexit betrayal by Keir Starmer. What do you make of those announcements from Reform UK? And bearing in mind, compare and contrast the two parties leading in the polls, in most polls right now. Reform UK is certainly at the top. Green Party under Zach Polanski's leadership getting a very soft ride. I mean, Zach Polanski, once again, come on my show. If you can, you want to stand up to some scrutiny, come on my show. I'll give you as long as you want, mate, any day of the week. But they basically would have an open border policy. And when I say open border, I do mean anyone can come in at all. You don't even need to claim asylum. There'll be no deportations. You come in and you'd be entitled to payments. Extraordinarily, you'd be entitled to a basic income, I think, of about was it about 10 grand a year or something? I mean, it's just, we would literally have a population of about, an extra 10 million within about 3 months. Because the third one would just get on planes and just arrive here.
An open border. And on top of that, legalised drugs. I just want people to sort of think about the world.
Oh, and no prisons.
No, it's genuine. The fact of the matter is that they're polling at, what is it, about nearly a fifth of the population.
Yeah.
That is a problem. That's a real problem, that there are so many people in this country who will simply ignore reality because it sounds nice. And there are an awful lot of people who also feel that way, who just haven't gone to the Greens yet because they're too ideologically wedded to Labour.
I don't think most people know most of their policies. Again, you've got the Gaza lot, and then you've got, but here's the, I mean, again, they'll put men in women's prisons in the same prison cells. I mean, I'm sorry. These people are they're just absolutely mad. And again,
that'll be the compromise, a gender-neutral prison.
a country without borders isn't a country.
Yeah.
It isn't a country. It's that simple. 11:27 is time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. 0344 499 1000. So much more to talk about. Lots more top guests to come. Coming up, we will take your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. This is Talk.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
The UK on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 11:30 is the time. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. And Catherine has done just that from Dorset. Catherine, you want to talk about Brexit betrayal, don't you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm worried about this 18 to 33 movement, which doesn't seem to get much press, but it's a demand of the EU for any of our, deals. They claim that it's because they want youth experience. Well, they've already got 27 countries to choose from.
They have, haven't they? Yeah, and that's the thing. I think it's 18 to 30, isn't it? But again, those are the people who move for work anyway. You know, you don't get most people in their 40s suddenly randomly moving across Europe for work. So that and there are more of them than there are of ours who are likely to want to change country.
There is, and so there's another reason behind this. So I'm not buying it at all. They say they want to come here to work. Well, we've got massive youth unemployment, so that means even more competition for kids, or loads of them over here without any work.
Yep.
Going to live, our youth mostly still live at home. So even if some of ours go over there, they're not freeing up accommodation over here for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost like they're just completely lying about everything. Do you actually think this is like what Keir Starmer is looking at doing with this statutory and some of these King Henry VIII powers? That it is actually a betrayal.
Absolutely. I worry what it's going to, mean in the long term. Are they going to be able to, if they haven't got any jobs and they've got nowhere to live, is he also agreeing for them to be able to claim any benefits?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they can already get.
I'm pretty sure they can. I mean, again, it's just painful that they're just totally ignoring what we voted for. They really are. But they know better than us, Catherine. Remember that.
I wonder whether it's because in the EU there are so many people who've migrated there and they don't actually want them. They've been given leave to stay, maybe.
Yeah.
If they come over here and lose their documents, will they then claim asylum?
Oh, and by the way, Spain basically giving Spanish nationality and therefore EU nationality, citizenship to basically anyone who's come in from abroad, a completely loony left government. Those people will also be eligible. So that's great, isn't it? Catherine, thank you for that. Pat is on the line in London. Hello, Pat.
Oh, good morning. Yeah, I mean, my take on it is that I think one of the reasons why he's done or doing this is that any potential reform government or reform Conservative government incoming, like potentially, would be totally scuppered.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, they could just change it. It depends what kind of a majority they've got. If they do have a majority, either a single or coalition. But this is about tying the hands of any future government, isn't it? It's about leaving a legacy.
This is putting it like them in up to their waist in quicksand. Because what would happen is that they'd have to spend most of the Parliament that they inhabit getting us free of it.
Exactly. And again, they don't then achieve anything else. I mean, I'm very, very worried about, if we did get either Reform or Tory or a coalition government, in how long it would take for them to do a lot of the things they say they would like to do, and especially with, once again, the civil service blob and most of the media trying to stop them from doing it as well. Pat, thank you for that call. Very interesting. 11:34 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. They're going to be talking about, Brexit betrayal, but also just how bad is the economy going to be here? Are we going to see fuel protests on the streets, as we've seen in Northern Ireland, across the rest of the United Kingdom? We'll talk about all of that with economist Liam Halligan. Stay tuned. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Welcome back to the show. 11:35 is the time. Delighted to welcome my next guest to the show, Liam Halligan. He's an economist and author of the Substack When the Facts Change, and he joins us to talk all things economics. Good morning to you, Liam.
Good to be with you, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. There's so much to talk about. Can we just start first?
I think we're going to need to get a coffee, aren't we?
I mean, I don't know. We've got till 1, but I've got some other guests. So I want to get through first of all just your reaction, because I know you're a big Brexiteer like myself, and most of our audience, I would guess, in terms of this sort of betrayal of Brexit by the back door by Keir Starmer in terms of aligning us with future rules using this Henry VIII statutory instrument. Without going into the details of that, we've talked about that already. You know, do you think this is Brexit by the back door, and do you think he'll succeed?
I think he may well succeed, because he's going to ram it through Parliament to the extent he's even going to consult Parliament with his big majority. And this is just desperate political positioning and posturing by a Labour Party that's seeing its natural coalition, the coalition between British proud working class people who've supported Labour for many generations and sort of progressive middle class people. That was the new Labour coalition. That's what delivered 3 successive Labour governments. But of course, the working classes have abandoned Labour because the Islington tendency has totally trumped any connection they have with working people. A lot of people at the top of the Labour Party, it strikes me, disdain working people, ramming idiotic net zero policies down their throat, destroying heavy industry, endlessly pandering about identity politics and gender wars. This kind of stuff really winds up working class people, of
sensible
course.
People.
As you and I know, talk radio listeners, and the modern Labour Party, people like Keir Starmer, frankly, North London lawyers, which is what he is, they don't understand that. They can't begin to bring themselves to do things that proud working class people in the UK want them to do. And so what they're doing is they're doubling down on the university towns and the sort of people who shop at Waitrose. Nothing wrong with that. I quite like a bit of Waitrose myself.
My local store.
by saying we're going to reverse Brexit because at Brexit referendum, you posh people who always get your own way didn't get your own way, and we're going to reverse that. It's also in policy terms. I know you don't want to get into the policy, and I understand that, but it is utter lunacy, and Brussels is laughing at us.
Oh, don't. I mean, that's the worst thing. I mean, the punishment beating they've tried to deliver to us over in Northern Ireland, and they're still trying to. And anyone who's travelled over Easter to an EU country and had to face those long passport delays, the biometrics, it's all done deliberately.
And that's pure spite.
It's just spite.
Even Michael O'Leary, right? One of the most, one of the most plain-spoken Irishmen in the history of the world. And there's lots of plain-spoken Irishmen. I'm allowed to say that, obviously. Even he says, in a country I know well that is massively pro the EU, the Irish Republic, even he says that all this fingerprint madness is just Brussels bullying Britain for having left.
I mean, exactly.
Finding out people who go on holidays on a plane.
Yeah, exactly. So you're worried about people coming from Britain or America or wherever, but not that bothered about the tens of thousands of undocumented men arriving on their shores in Spain and in Italy and in Greece. That's fine. No, not worried about them. I mean, it's absolutely insane. Let's also talk about where we are in terms of what's going on with the Iran conflict, because a lot of economists, a lot of people who understand rather better, it would appear, than the civil servants and the politicians in this country, just how significant our supply routes are and how important fossil fuels are and other key things that come through the Strait of Hormuz are warning that we ain't seen nothing yet. We've been seeing when you go to fill up your car at the forecourt, diesel's gone up a hell of a lot, petrol by almost as much. People are getting worried. We've had warnings about aviation fuel shortages in the future. We know there's also helium, absolutely crucial for an awful lot of our IT, fertiliser, a big issue as well. But we're told that, even if the war ended tomorrow, straits were open and everything was fine, there'd still be a big impact. It doesn't look like that is going to happen. Talk us through just how big the economic hit could be, bearing in mind we've just had a load of protests at the weekend in Northern Ireland over the cost of fuel. We've got a threat in the last few moments just been added. Farmers for Action, a campaign group here, have threatened the Chancellor Rachel Reeves that they're going to block Britain's roads unless she does bring down fuel costs.
The Strait of Hormuz is it is the ultimate pinch point of the global economy. I spent quite a lot of time in the Middle East. I know that part of the world well. I was literally in Oman 3 weeks before Trump launched this war, and I looked out of my hotel room, and I could, you can see Iran on a clear day. It's like it's 20 miles wide at its narrowest point, which is the equivalent of the English Channel, of course. And through that strait goes a third of the world's seaborne oil and liquefied natural gas every day, a fifth of all oil and gas used around the world. As you say, about a third of the world's helium, which is used to make semiconductors. If you can't make semiconductors, you can't, all manufacturing now, it lives or dies on whether or not you got semiconductors, certainly a lot of it. And then, of course, you've got phosphate, and you've got natural gas, which is a feedstock for fertilizer, something called urea. Yeah, it's really called that. Another feedstock for fertilizer. And the main thing for viewers and listeners to consider, Julia, is that a lot of these ships that pass through Hormuz, they generally take between 4 to 6 weeks to get where they're going, right? So for the first 4 to 6 weeks after the Iranians blocked Hormuz, all the ships that were going to go somewhere were already beyond Hormuz, and they've been arriving, okay? So a lot of the increase in prices we've seen on global markets, for all the things we've just mentioned, phosphate, fertilizer prices are up 40% around the world now. Those ships have been arriving because those ships had already cleared Hormuz when this war began. We're now at the point where physical ships aren't going to arrive where they're meant to be. And there's one thing about speculation pushing prices up, but there's no policy in the world, no summit in the world that can replace physical shortage of absolute...
It simply isn't leaving the Middle East, full stop.
No, because those ships take 4 to 6 weeks to get there. They've been getting there because they already left 4 to 6 weeks ago. We're now, 4 to 6 weeks since the strait was blocked, good and proper. So now the ships aren't arriving. And this is when panic will overtake markets. And it's not just fuel. And you've talked rightly about the fuel protests. In Ireland, the Republic, where I have lots of family, as you know, the scenes are absolutely incredible. I mean, it's French style, in small towns in the west of Ireland, where my family's from, proper protests going on, blockades going on. And it's not just fuel. It's also the fertilizer. If fertilizer doesn't get to Asia, if those crops aren't sown sharpish, then on top of a fuel price spike, we're going to have a food price spike. With the fuel price adding to the food price spike, because all food needs to be transported, packaged, used in plastic. All of that needs oil and gas. So we've got to be careful. I don't want to be alarmist about this, but we're really looking at a kind of perfect storm in terms of the cost of living. And I don't detect much sense at the top of government that they actually understand this.
I don't think they understand the supply chains. And again, in developing countries, and a lot of them near the Middle East, who rely particularly on things like fertilizer, we are talking about, starvation. We're not talking about prices go up. People don't have the money to pay for the increased food goods. And we've seen, what happened in Sri Lanka when they didn't use fertilizer. And they had massive food shortages, and the country had no money to import.
And massive political turmoil. Governments falling.
And that's the thing. And we know in general elections and presidential elections in America, famously, it's the economy stupid. How big an impact do you think that could have, not just, around the world, but here in the UK? Bearing in mind that what did Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves said they were going to have a steely focus on the cost of living and on growth. That ain't going to happen anytime soon, is it?
Well, an economy can't grow when you're taxing the life out of it, which is what is happening. Labour's answer to everything is more government spending, which means more borrowing and more taxation. We're already at a 70-year high. They don't understand that sometimes when you bring tax rates down, you actually get more revenue because you get more growth. We've just had a raft of measures coming in April, which are completely mullering. Sorry to use a kind of playground verb, but it's such a good one. Small businesses, you're seeing hiring dropping off a cliff with repeated, completely unrealistic increases in the minimum wage, which of course business pays for. Quickly on America, then back to the UK. On America, yes, America is now a major energy exporter. It's the biggest exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas, in the world because of their shale revolution since the early 2000s.
We should have done that.
It's also a major exporter of oil. So a lot of American companies, lots of them have lots of connections to Meagher and the White House and Trump. They're making out like bandits during this. But, middle America, mom and pop America, they hate inflation, and petrol, what they call gas, they put in their cars, is now $4 a barrel, and that is a red line in American politics. So this is damaging.
$4 a gallon, I think.
A gallon. Sorry, that will upset seriously the Trump base. So Trump definitely wants this solved, even though the oil and gas lobby in America really is making out in this war. Back to the UK, Julia. You and I have discussed it in the past a lot, that Britain is uniquely vulnerable at the moment. And it's uniquely vulnerable because not only do we have an inflation problem, that's why our borrowing costs have been so much higher than any G7 country now for well over a year.
They're higher than Greece's borrowing, for goodness sake.
Higher than Greece, higher than Morocco, with apologies to our dear Moroccan friends. But we not only have an inflation problem, we not only have very high government borrowing costs going into this crisis, we are a net energy importer, right? And we are also a net food importer, which on a very fertile island with lots of oil and gas is insane.
Yep.
And because we are a net energy importer and a net food importer, that combination, our already bad reputation when it comes to containing inflation is getting worse and worse and worse. And that is going to push up borrowing costs even more, which is going to escalate the government's debt interest bill. It's going to escalate flexible mortgage rates. It's going to escalate the cost of getting finance for firms to grow and invest and build factories and employ people. And if anything good can come out of this ghastly situation in the Middle East, let it be that those of us who have been pointing out these issues for years and years and years about our massive, stupid double dependency on imports are finally listened to.
Oh, please, yes. I'd like to say that Liam Halligan is available for children's parties and weddings as well. On that happy note, I mean, we covered a lot of ground there. There's still loads more I want to talk to you about, but time's against us. But yeah, I mean, I was reading your Sunday Telegraph piece this week, and again about, we're still doubling down on the most insane things. But apparently the whole issue is that if only we could just have closer ties with the EU, everything would be fine. I'm really not sure about that. Liam Halligan, economist, author of the Substack When the Facts Change. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Quick word from Benedict Spence.
Well, you said at the top of the show that you tend to be an optimist because you think that British people are sensible and that this will all sort itself out. This is why I'm not an optimist. This is why I'm a pessimist, because all of these things have been true for a very long time, and yet still there just doesn't seem to be any impetus towards changing it.
No. Well, at least most of the media are now getting with the programme. And again, they're all following behind us because all the stuff we've been saying for a very, very long time. And by the way, the Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels has been making a speech talking about how member states of the EU must coordinate on energy costs. Yeah, that ain't going to solve your problems, love. 11:49 is time. Up next, going to talk about the NHS and why it's in the state it's in, or why the BMA won't talk to the government. We're going to be talking to Popular Conservatism's Mark Littlewood. This is Talk.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:52 is the time. Let's get to my next guest, Director of Popular Conservatism. Mark Littlewood joins us right now to discuss the state of the NHS. A very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we've seen the end this morning of the latest doctor strike. 15 doctor strikes we've had, which is weird. A lot of them have happened under Labour, but they said they were going to sort that out. It doesn't appear that they are doing so. Wes Streeting is refusing, he says, to basically give in on the wage demands we've got. He's also saying he's refusing to cut health to boost defence spending. He's done a speech this morning, despite a report, the IPPR, this is the Institute for Public Policy Research, very much a Blairite think tank, published a report out today showing that after analysis of 22 wealthy nations, found that our health service ranked almost at the bottom of a league table for so-called treatable mortality. Basically, we have the worst survival rates pretty much in the developed world, despite record funding for the health service. But we're told that the answer isn't to get rid of the monolithic health service and move to the system which most other countries have, which is this sort of social insurance policy. What do you make of that report?
Yeah, well, it's odd, isn't it? Because the data it puts forward would suggest that we need to have a long talk and a serious discussion about how we provide healthcare. I think we're second from bottom on treatable illnesses. I think the USA might even be bottom.
Yeah.
So it's the right way
they spend twice as much.
And they spend a fortune, yeah. And too often we get into this argument about, well, shouldn't we stick with the NHS because for all of its problems, nobody wants the American system, which is incredibly expensive, as if there are only two options on the table. Yeah. Well, I find that a bit of a Little Englander attitude. I think we should actually look across the channel and see if we can learn anything from our European neighbours. And they seem to perform enormously better on the key metrics. We shouldn't be looking at life expectancy. That's caused by a whole range of things. Yeah. For example, a high murder rate will mean your life expectancy goes down. That's nothing to do with healthcare. Yeah. What we should be looking at is...
no, but also, you live in the Mediterranean...
What's your chance of...
No, you live in the Mediterranean diet. There's a certain lifestyle. There are different countries have certain different impacts on their health. Course. But you're talking about if someone gets, heart disease, if someone gets cancer, basically you're better off being treated in not just France. You're better off being treated in Romania than you are in the UK.
If you would look at these, across a range of serious illnesses, cancer, a heart attack, you've had a stroke. If you like, what we're looking at is what's the chance that you're still alive 1 year later, 2 years later, 5 years later. And the last time I looked at the statistics, the UK was slightly behind Bulgaria and Slovakia. And you would have thought with the UK's wealth and abilities that we would be well ahead.
But wait a minute, but we're told, are we not? That's because there was decades of underinvestment, particularly in the austerity years, even though, small point worth making, there'd been a banking crash in 2008, 29, and actually the Tories actually stuck to the Labour Chancellor's, Alistair Darling's spending plans. I mean, Labour wouldn't have had any more money to spend if they'd been in office. That's a simple matter of fact. But their argument is that there was this massive underspending at a time when we had an ageing population. We've had this massive big bubble of, my parents were in this, the baby boomers who are suddenly in their 70s and early 80s needing a whole heap of different healthcare. There are lots of them. They're living a lot longer. And there are a few workers paying for it, and that's kind of the problem. What would you say to that?
It is true, if you go back 10 or 15 years, that the proportion of our national income that we were spending on health was a sliver lower than our equivalent Western European countries. But that's no longer the case. As a proportion of our total national income, we're about in the middle. We're not startlingly high like America, but we're not startlingly low. Of course, an argument made for the NHS was that it would have such great efficiencies of scale that we'd be able to get away with spending a bit less because of the hyper efficiency of having one single provider. But now, as we're speaking today in 2026, this argument for underinvestment simply doesn't hold. We have now tested increased NHS spending over and over again. We've tested this theory to the maximum to, unfortunately, a spectacularly poor series of results. So I think the idea now that you shovel more money into it, rather than at least looking at the systems, needs to really be put to one side. And again, the idea that you would want the British health system over the Dutch or the Danish or the German strikes me as ludicrous.
Yeah, and again, what the NHS was,
there's something to learn.
Yeah, exactly. When the NHS was created, it was a fantastic, wonderful system. But again, they didn't plan for it to be doing quite so many treatments. People were living, 20, 30 years less at the time. There weren't all these expensive treatments. But the reality is, no other country has copied us. I think, Cuba. But there's a reason why they haven't. And lots of people have this idea, as you say, oh, well, we don't want to be like America. God, no, we don't want to be like America. The health outcomes in America, unless you're very rich, are absolutely appalling. But most countries aren't like America either. And we've got all these other countries, which, by the way, a lot of our doctors are happy, who love the NHS, are happy to go and work in Australia, Canada and elsewhere. But it's fascinating. They have almost, to a T, these social insurance systems where, weirdly enough, people are not dying on the street. People are getting healthcare and they're getting it quicker and they're getting it better and they're living longer, which surely should be the only thing that we should care about.
It's exactly that. Look, I think what people worry about in the debate over health, especially why the American example is adduced so often as oh my God, we don't want to go there, is that people quite rightly want to ensure that health coverage is universal. Yep. Absolutely, everybody has it. And also, by and large, free at the point of use. OK, we do charge for prescriptions, but they're a modest fee. So that's what people want. And they're very nervous about moving to a system that might be, oh my God, I've suddenly been diagnosed with cancer and I need to find £500,000 or I'm going to die. But where we can put their hearts and minds to rest, where we can assuage those fears, is right across Europe, there is universal coverage. Yep. It is not a case that the bottom 10, 15, 20% are just sort of left behind to die. If you can't afford your insurance premium, the government tops it up for you. But what they do have is a much more dynamic process. It has competition in it, so patients can start to choose much more readily where they want to go to, and they want to be
They get an appointment virtually on the day. Small point worth making. As you can hear, the music tells us time is against us. Mark Littlewood, Director at Popular Conservatism, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'll get Benedict Spence's thought on that coming up. 11:59 is the time. We're going to be talking with Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander and former Royal Navy commander, about what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. We're also going to be talking about the Phase 1 Southport inquiry report, which is out in the next minute or so, into Axel Rudkabana. What could have been done to stop him? This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, approaching 3 minutes past 12 o'clock. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or your connected device, really appreciate you joining me. Lots to talk about on the show. Coming up, we are going to be talking about the Southport inquiry. They've just released the first report of the inquiry's phase 1, looking at basically what could have been done to stop the Southport killer, Axel Rudakabana, from killing those 3 little girls, attacking 8 other little girls and 2 adults as well, failing to stop him before he carried out those murders. An incredibly damning report, that is. We're going to be talking to Chris Phillips about that, of course, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Officer, and of course a former Met Police DCI as well. Coming up in just a moment, we are going to be discussing Donald Trump's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and Keir Starmer's refusal to join in. Labour MPs demanding that Keir Starmer kills off his Che-Goster, which is pretty much gone by now, but also that Boris wave costing British households £20,000, according to analysis by Reform UK. There's a lot more coming up on all of that. Joining me for the conversation is Benedict Spence, a Conservative commentator. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to get a quick response from you from the on the health service, but we've just had and just speaking right now is the chair of the Southport inquiry. This is Adrian Fulford. He's the inquiry chairman, and he's published a report in the last couple of moments, and it's extraordinarily critical of basically pretty much every agency that could have, and as he says, should have stopped the murder of those 3 little girls, and also remember all the other little girls who have had life-changing injuries. But the Southport attack, the inquiry has found, would not have happened if the killer's parents had done, quote, what they morally ought to have done. The teenagers' parents, Alphonse Rudakabana and Letitia Meagher, they knew their son was hoarding knives. They knew they were arriving. They knew he'd, expelled from school for carrying a knife into school 10 times. They knew what he was looking at in terms of online content, violent content, chilling, described by the inquiry chair. And they knew he'd been making poison, the ricin, in his room. They knew all of that, and they failed to warn the authorities because they didn't want him to be taken away by the authorities. He's strongly critical of the moral failure of the parents to warn the authorities about his weapons, and he says what I find was their fatalistic approach to the risk that Rudakabana posed of violence to others. The families of B.B. King, Elsie Dot Stankum and Alice De Silva Egua, aged 6, 7 and 9, who died after receiving multiple stab wounds during the attack, and extraordinary, there's other 8 little girls. How they survived is beyond me, but thank God they did. But life-changing injuries. Their families have previously called for the killer's parents to be held to account for their son's crimes. Now, Rudakabana was jailed for 52 years back in January last year. Again, I don't know why they can't just say for life. He only avoided that because he was 9 days below his 18th birthday when he carried out the attack. But there's an awful lot of criticism also in this report about all of the different organisations whose job it was to actually stop this attack. At least 6 public bodies being criticised, 2 police forces, 2 NHS mental health services, the local councils, family and social services accounts. No retailers selling him weapons and machetes and the like. But all of these organisations, being referred to Prevent twice, but he wasn't definitely Al Qaeda, so they weren't quite sure what he was involved in, and therefore they didn't stop him. Everybody knew that this young Welsh choir boy was no longer a normal 12-year-old Welsh choir boy whose parents were, immigrants from a violent war-torn state. They knew he was a potential killer. He was carrying knives. He was threatening people. He was obsessed with death and genocide. And they knew it, and no one acted. And those 3 little girls are lying under the ground now because of that.
I think, though, that this is, frankly, it's actually quite a good snapshot of the holistic failure of Britain, which is that you have all of these different agencies, any one of which, if they'd done their job, might have prevented this.
Just one of them had.
But the point is, none of them do. And on top of that, you've got the failure of the parents at home. You know, there's a selfishness and an inherent, I would say actually, an inherent selfishness, self-centeredness about far too many private individuals in this country who do not look at things in the round. As you said themselves, because they were worried that their son was going to be taken away. He should have been taken away for the good of the community.
And then their son wouldn't be in prison for the rest of his life as well.
You have to have a greater vision, actually, about what your responsibility is, not just to your family, not just to your clan, not just to your street, to everybody. And that's my problem with all of this, is that far too many things are slowly being allowed to fail. Far too many elements of our society are just decaying, frankly. Why are we surprised that actually, because we're talking about this because it's a particularly horrific event, but there were people stabbed in London this week. There were people stabbed. It made the headlines, but it didn't make the headlines in the way it once did. This is becoming normalised now. Why? Because so many elements of British society and the state
and again, you look at the Nottingham killer as well. You're in exactly the same, absolute same circumstances. I mean, it's just true. We are going to, as I say, we're going to be talking to Chris Phillips in a few moments, and I'll get your thoughts on this as well. Get in touch. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll take your calls a little bit later in the hour, so we can have that conversation. Also, your calls about Brexit betrayal as well. Let's go to my next guest now, and I'm sure actually he would like to comment on the Southport inquiry, what we've seen. Rear Admiral Chris Parry, retired. He's a former NATO commander and a former Royal Navy commander as well, and joins us to talk about what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. But Chris Parry, I'm sure you would like to give your thoughts on just the initial findings. This is just from phase one, about basically of this Southport inquiry. What could have and what should have been done by pretty much everyone who met this killer to stop him from basically killing those children back in 2024?
Julia, I think we've got a common psychosis in this country today, and that is the difference between the truth and what people want to believe. I think that's where it starts. But, within about 12 hours of that happening, I knew there was a connection between the Taylor Swift issue and something to do with Islamic terrorism. Because you'll recall, about 2 weeks before, they had banned a concert in Austria over Taylor Swift.
They had to cancel it because of the threats.
And so immediately I wanted to come up on Twitter and say, hang on, there's a possible connection here, and there may be a wider threat to the public. But of course, that would have landed me with a police interview and possibly jail if I'd have done that. So this complete suppression of free speech contributed, I think, to a deteriorating security situation, and of course the paranoia of the government that then led to people not being able to say, look, there might be a wider threat, please protect yourself.
But again, even when a threat is clearly identified, and I would think a kid turning up at school on 10 different occasions with a knife, caught with a knife on a bus repeatedly, attacking kids with a hockey stick in his school. He was banned from school, banned from the social services, and the people who were supposed to be dealing with him were too frightened to enter the home because he was so violent. Oh, but let's just leave him free to do whatever he wants and to order knives on the internet. This is extreme. When we see the most extraordinary amount of interference in ordinary law-abiding, safe citizens' daily lives, in terms of every little thing about, oh, we're not allowed to see chocolate at the end of a supermarket aisle because we'll all get fat, what kids can eat in their school dinners, driving at 20 miles per hour on a massive big wide road in broad daylight or in the middle of, all these tiny little things that are constantly controlling what we do. But you're not going to stop a kid who is obsessed with genocide, carries knives, and you're not going to stop him. This is where people are just tearing their hair out, that the authorities that are there to protect us don't protect us anymore.
Well, I think the other thing, Julia, is nobody's ever responsible. It's everybody's responsible. Nobody's responsible. If I hear again lessons have been learned when they should have been learned beforehand, I'll be tearing my hair out. We've just got to get back to personal accountability. And frankly, we need to name and shame the people who were involved in this and failed to step forward. John Stuart Mill, you'll recall, said, for evil to happen, all it takes is for good people to do nothing. Well, I'm afraid there's some not very good people doing nothing here. here, and we need to name, shame, and we need to deal with them.
Yeah, and again, it's the same as Nottingham Killer. It's also the same as the grooming gangs. Just like, oh, don't do anything, don't say anything. We're in the same territory. We've got an abjectly failing state. We really do. We're definitely failing when it comes to defence as well. Let's talk about what I invited you on to do. About Keir Starmer has said doesn't want to get involved in trying to end this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not entirely sure we could get involved. He's promised some minesweepers. We had a minesweeper in Bahrain nearby. We moved that before this war even started, even though, of course, you wouldn't have guessed that there was a war happening. Oh, in fact, Keir Starmer was told there'd be a war, but still moved the minesweeper. Donald Trump says, basically, as of 3 o'clock UK time today, so in less than 3 hours, Strait of Hormuz is going to be fully blockaded. So while Iran is stopping other ships going in and out, America is going to stop any of Iran's authorised tankers from going out, selling their oil, making money from China and India and the like. Can he actually do that, and will that succeed?
Oh, yes, of course he can, Julia. They've got the military power to do that. I mean, the blockade's really an excuse to get their military forces on the ground, not only to hold down Iran's economy, but also to reassert presence in the event that they need to start war fighting again. What stopped them doing it up until now, of course, is they had one of their carriers off station. The USS Ford had to go and get repaired after a fire, if you remember. And I think had the second carrier been available in the Eastern Mediterranean, then the Abraham Lincoln wouldn't have had to take on all the roles. As soon as that one is either replaced or returns to the fray, I think you'll see a step up of this. 2 US destroyers transited the Straits of Hormuz, as you know, within the last 36 hours, perfectly safely. And I think what is going to happen is, as you said, he's going to strangle the Iranian economy, put pressure on it, and therefore say, look, there's lots of things we can do here. It's not just a question of attacking you.
But here's the thing, though. The Iranian mullahs don't care about the Iranian economy. They don't care about the Iranian people, though we did think... I mean, it wasn't just about people wanting free of the Ayatollah when those protests started in January. A lot of that was about the economic nightmare that people were living in terms of the sky-high rate of inflation. I mean, we think we've got a problem. I mean, add 1,000 plus on top of that. But they don't care, whereas Donald Trump and other Democratic leaders do have to care. He's got the midterm elections in November. He said he was elected saying he was going to be a president who would end wars, not start wars. It's a very unpopular war in America, very unpopular war around the world. Now, I'm of the view that this is a defensive war, not an offensive one, and need to take place. Whether it was properly planned for and strategically thought through, that's another matter entirely. But can he just walk away, or is he going to actually have to stay? And who's going to blink first? Because he's got more pressure on him from his public in terms of the cost of living than the Iranian government is going to have from the Iranian people.
Julia, I think Iran's more fragile than people believe. I've been looking at it, and there's about 8 factions fighting amongst each other in Iran right now. Quite a lot of their services, utilities, infrastructure have been taken apart. And I think when you say who's going to blink first, I think the Iranians might well do so if they put the squeeze on their exports, particularly if they start controlling what's coming in and out of the Gulf. You remove the leverage that the Iranians have got. I think you'll find that the United States will be able to deal with quite a lot of the threats that are imposed there. What I think Iran will probably do is lash out again at Israel and some of the other Gulf states, because they can't take on the US directly.
But it depends where they lash out, because attacking is one thing to sort of stop oil tankers coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. It's another thing if you're actually attacking those energy facilities, or worse, the desalination plants on which most of the population of the Middle East rely for their clean drinking water.
Yeah, but I think they're going to need to keep the Saudis and these other countries out of the fight. The UAE's been quite belligerent about the islands that it has claims to and things like that. They've got to be very careful about bringing those on the side of the Americans. And I think if they were to do that, the international coalition would increase in relation to Iran's aggression. I think that option is probably closing down for them now. Most of their propaganda right now seems to be based on being a victim all of a sudden.
Yes.
We mustn't let them get away with that.
No, what they're doing, well, the media is absolutely letting them get away with that, because extraordinary, and again, the EU, Ursula von der Leyen as well, playing along with this ridiculous narrative of like, oh, isn't it terrible? And the BBC and Sky News and everyone, isn't it terrible that Israel is attacking Lebanon? Why would they do that out of the blue? No, they are defending themselves against the Hezbollah terrorists, who is a heavily armed militia armed by Iran, who've been attacking Israel for decades, and in particular since October the 8th, 2023. That's the narrative you hear in the media.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, I think there's another shock in the pipeline. I think that Israel's probably going to occupy southern Lebanon up to the River Litani, which, of course, was the boundary between where Hezbollah were supposed to retreat to in 2007.
And didn't. And the UN was supposed to oversee that and didn't. I mean, that's the thing. UN keeps failing. At the end of the day, we wouldn't put up with weapons, with missile attacks on people in part of our country, then having to leave that part of the country. No other country would be expected to put up with it. Let's talk about one other thing. Well, we wouldn't. I was going to say two, really, just very briefly. The French Navy having to help patrol the channel because we haven't got enough ships. I mean, that's just a national humiliation, as would have been giving away the Chagos Islands, including the Diego Garcia base, to military base to Mauritius, big ally, basically beholden to China, and then renting back our Diego Garcia air base back. Now, absurd situation. Donald Trump was for it, against it, and basically we think Nigel Farage did a bit of Trump whispering, very much now opposed to it. Relations between Starmer and Donald Trump pretty bad. The Chagos deal, the bill that's going through the House of Lords, basically is run out of time. Labour backbenchers are saying, for the love of God, drop this bill. Do you think that the outrageous giving away of the Chagos Islands and then paying for the privilege of doing so, do you think that is now not going to happen?
Well, Julia, you know, you and I have been fighting this for nearly 2 years, and loads of other people have jumped on the bandwagon, and suddenly the Conservatives have said they were in the lead. Quite extraordinary.
Apparently, they've been claiming credit for this, haven't they? Not entirely sure.
Quite extraordinary. But, you know, it's a triumph of the national will to say, look, we're not going to give away sovereign territory and then pay for the privilege. Strategically, it was always incredibly ridiculous. And I'm really glad that I hope it's been retracted. The trouble is, if we know this government, they're going to do it by stealth. You'll find that civil servants will be negotiating behind our backs. You'll find lawyers selling us down the river. And all of a sudden, we'll find that we're presented with a fait accompli. You just can't trust them, I'm afraid. So we need to keep on their tail.
Absolutely. It's interesting. There might be another international court ruling on behalf of the Chagosians who wish to go back to their homeland. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? Really good to talk to you. Covered a lot of ground there. Rear Admiral Chris Parry, a former NATO commander and former Royal Navy commander as well. Benedict Spence, just want to come back in on any of that, and then I'd like to get back to Southport.
Well, there's one thing that you said, which was that we wouldn't stand for it if anybody was firing missiles at our country. But, you know, I do wonder sometimes, given how placid we are about almost everything else, would we not just sit there and go, well, you know, whoever it is, maybe they have an argument, maybe it's something to do with decolonisation, and, you know, we do all just want to get along, so maybe it would be against international law to fire back at whoever these people are.
They genuinely
whenever we have these conversations, I do think, do you know what? That's the Britain of once upon a time. I'm not so sure these days, I've got to be honest.
God, you're depressing me today. You and Liam Halligan, good Lord. 12:19, let's just going to go back to just some of the things that has been said in this Southport inquiry report. This is phase one. This is about basically what could have been done, and it's a run-up to the attack on that Taylor Swift-themed dance event in the summer of 2024. I've got such vivid memories of being on air when the case when he was being sentenced, Asghar Urbanah, known only as AR throughout these hearings, and we were hearing the details of what had happened to those little girls. And I said, I'm a hard-bitten old hack, and Philip Ingram was with us, and we were both struggling, fighting back tears because the details were so horrific. The chair of the inquiry has described this as an act of unparalleled cruelty. This is Adrian Fulford, the inquiry chair. It's a very hard-hitting report. He's blamed the parents of the killer. They say they could have and should have prevented the attack. Been highly critical of bungling, public bodies, whether it's mental health or whether it is, prevent strategy, whether it is police forces, abject failures. He's making 67 recommendations in his report, establishing a single dedicated agency or structure with responsibility for monitoring and coordinating interventions for children and young people who present a high risk of harm, of serious harm. Everyone thought he was a high risk, but he just kind of fell between each different agency. He says the second phase of the inquiry should consider development of a multi-agency tool to assess risk that can be used across public sector services. He's selected the whole report to look at 6 different public bodies to be criticised. But I say his first words were the most damning about the abject failures of the parents to act when they knew that their son was going to be a risk. And of course we saw the 8 little girls attacked and life-changing injuries, 2 adults as well, and also the 3 little girls, BB King, Elsie Stancombe and Alicia De Silva Aguirre, who lost their lives and whose parents have said that parents need to be held to account. And they do. If you think your child is getting weapons and is obsessed with violence and could kill, and that one time we got a video, is that the father literally begging a taxi driver not to take his son because he feared he had a knife with him and he was going to go and attack his school. Sorry, you should be at the police station every day saying you need to take my son into custody. Yeah,
it's that fact that they knew that what was going on was clearly wrong.
How do they live with themselves?
It's just tremendously frustrating because it is that sort of breakdown of societal responsibility, ultimately. You know, we get it. It's your son. But if you're that scared about what he's going to do that you're saying to somebody, no, don't do that because he might do this. What do they think was going to happen?
If you're scared of your own child.
Exactly. Yeah. What do they think the end result of that? It so often is the case in Britain these days. What do people think the end result of just sort of holding off and hoping that the worst case scenario doesn't happen? What actually ends up happening is, of course, the worst case scenario happens. And this is whether it's a foreign policy thing or a domestic policy, a mass migration, whether it's the massive tax burden on us, all of these things. The attitude is, put it off until tomorrow. It'll sort itself out, and it never does.
It never does, indeed. 12:23 is the time. We're going to be talking to Chris Phillips, former head of National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, about the details of this report. This is Talk.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door and away.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Right, well, let's talk right now more about that detailed report and announcement from the Southport inquiry, looking into basically what could have and what should have been done to prevent that awful, horrific stabbing spree carried out by Axel Rüdiger-Banda that took 3 little girls' lives, left 8 others horrifically injured, and 2 adults as well. Let's talk to Chris Phillips. He's the former head of the National's Counter-Terrorism Security Office and a former DCI with the Met Police as well. Good afternoon to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Well, this inquiry, I mean, the report is as horrific as many of us would have expected it to be. Lots of expectations given the hearings that have been public from what we've heard from the parents of the families, but from the parents of Axel Rüdiger-Banda himself, various different agencies, former head teachers, you name it. We knew there was going to be a lot of criticism, but it is interesting that the first criticism he made was of the parents, and he was very, very clear. He says that it would not have happened if the killer's parents had done what they morally ought to have done, and he talks about the parents, Alfonso Rüdiger-Banda and Letitia Meagher. He said they knew their son was hoarding knives. He knew they were accessing what he called chilling, violent content online. They were scared of him themselves. They knew he'd been making poison in his room, and they did not act. What do you make of that?
Well, yes, that is clearly an issue that you just can't explain. But the trouble is, we have got a series, many young people that have gone out of control, that their parents can't control across the country. We know, if you just look at the amount of stabbings and knife crime, we have got lots of parents that are unable to control their children. That's one thing. But this is mental health. And mental health is something that, as a country, we've really let go to rack and ruin. In my early days, I remember many hospitals where people with severe issues like this were locked up. Those don't exist anymore. They've been put out into the community.
Care in the community, Chris.
Care in the community, and the care in the community then, of course, gets cut. And if you've been speaking and listening to police officers over the last 20 years, they would say that a huge percentage of their time is spent dealing with mental health cases.
Yeah, and again, there's also the issue, though. Again, when everyone's got a mental health issue, no one has a mental health. You can't actually focus your resources on people like this man who went from being apparently a perfectly happy-go-lucky little, this is a little Welsh choir boy image that we saw for the first year after that crime, to being, in a very short period of time, utterly deranged, violent and dangerous to everyone who came across him. And yet he managed to fall through the cracks. And this thing is not just about the parents, and it is interesting. The inquiry chair, Sir Adrian Fulford, says he's urging the public not to unfairly target the parents or indeed other people in other agencies, shouldn't be used to vilify or unfairly attack any of the individuals or the bodies for whom they work. And I agree with on that. He says their life at home must have been little short of a nightmare, given, to use the words of his own father, Axel Rüdiger-Banda had turned into a monster. But yes, I think they should have acted. But this is the thing. We see again and again and again in what we've seen in the inquiry hearings and in this report, systemic failure. So a kid who takes knives into school on 10 different occasions, who has to be expelled from his school because he's turned up and attacked children, violently with a hockey stick, who was hoarding knives, buying them online. His parents knew that. Who when social workers and others went to see him at home, either wouldn't be allowed in, or he wouldn't agree to see them, or they were actually too afraid to go in unless a police officer was with them. And yet he was left in the community, able to basically roam at will wherever he wanted as a young man. He may have been under 18, but he was still a danger. And agency answer after agency failed, like the prevent strategy he was referred to twice. But because they weren't sure whether he was Al-Qaeda, whether he was Islamic, he didn't fit into any particular category. So they went, not our problem, handed him on to the next one. 3 little girls. Little girls had to be buried by their parents because of that. That's unforgivable.
How do you ever explain this to any sane person, that this man was allowed to roam around the streets? But let me put it this way, Julia. If you go into any of our city centres now, you will see people lying on the pavement, sleeping rough.
Yep.
And the comment is, oh, yeah, they've got mental health issues. They won't. Well, what are we doing about this stuff?
Yeah.
Why are we allowing this man and the guy in Nottingham, who so viciously killed those 2 young...
Callacane. Again, who could have and should have been stopped.
they should have been stopped and they should have been dealt with. And we need to have a mental health system that works, that actually deals with people and locks people up if they're not safe to be in the community.
And that's the issue, isn't it? And again, as you said, and it's something loads of police officers have been saying for a long time, that a huge amount of their time is spent dealing with people who are severely mentally ill. And we're not talking about somebody, you know, who claims they need an extra hour in an exam, for goodness sake, because of their, you know, their autism. And this is the thing. The fact that there are so many agencies, so many people, there would have been so many different people who'd have been assigned this boy and then young man to basically, as you know, use their so-called expertise on. None of them acted. None of them did what needed to be done, which was to make sure that he was not a danger to others and indeed to himself and indeed his own family. They fear. I mean, there, as you say, there are far too many parents who are, especially lone mums, terrified of their children. I often look at parents. I'm looking at how they allow their 6-year-old or 8-year-old to behave with them, and I'm like, yeah, good luck when he's 16, love, because that's going to hurt then. You know, you're allowing that behaviour now. We have an abject failure parenting. We've got an abject failure in our mental health units and in our policing and in prevent and all of that. And as my previous guest is going to say, we're going to be told that here are a load of recommendations. We're going to have some agency that's going to pull it all together and lessons will be learned. And I don't think a single person listening to that, it believes a word of it.
No, and you know, it does come down, when it comes into politics here, this does go back a long time. There's a lack of investment into all of our services. Policing, absolutely devastated. No one 20, 30 years ago would have ever thought that our police force would be so bad as it is now. Yeah. No one would have thought that. Our mental health services, no one would have considered that. You know, we've always had people with mental health issues. But the fact is that now you go into our city centres and they're lying on the streets, and they've come in from other countries sometimes. Yep. And we just brush them off as that being a normal situation. It's not normal for people to sleep rough. It's not normal for people with mental health issues to be roaming around the streets. And we need to get a grip. And, you know, we've said this before, Julie, we've had these conversations. Yep. Society needs to get a grip, or things are just going to get worse, and we'll have more of these type of incidents.
Yeah, and again, and we know again and again, often the situation's been, again, this, although he was, yes, we know he was born in Cardiff, we all remember but actually, you know, his parents were from a war-torn state and had seen some horrific things, and you know, this idea that, well, you know, he's a black kid, you know, and excuses being made. He was autistic, excuses being made, and not putting safety as the number one and frankly only thing that needs to be considered. Now, Fulford, the chair of the committee, of this inquiry, he says that Rudy Cabana's case was passed from one agency to another. He says in an inappropriate merry-go-round, in a failure, he says, that lies at the heart of why he was able to mount that attack. He said there were so many warning signs of his capacity for fatal violence. For instance, he says it was a watershed moment when he took a knife to his former school in December 2019 and attacked a boy with a hockey stick, as I mentioned. Should have led to a conclusion from all agencies that he posed a high risk of harm. In 2022, when he was caught on a bus with a knife, he should have been arrested, and his possession of an Al-Qaeda manual and rice indices would have come to light then, but they weren't told that he had a past risk, so none of that happened. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, all of the different failures. I mean, Joanne Hodson, his special education needs coordinator at the referral unit he was sent to, Acorns, after he had to be excluded for taking a knife into school 10 times, said she was very concerned about him and hoped they were going to get help by the family. But one by one, the agencies peeled away. By the time of the killing, he had not been seen by any of the services that are supposed to have seen him for months, because each time they couldn't get in, they just basically took him off the books. The fact that they couldn't enter the home, the fact that he wouldn't see them, that alone should have triggered action. In the same way, you remember, you know, baby P or whatever. Well, the social workers didn't see the bruises because they couldn't get in. No, not being able to see the child is the giveaway you need to take the child into safety. I mean, again and again and again, this happens. Do they never learn their lessons, or are they just like tick box exercising?
Well, to some extent, I think they are. But the key thing is, what would happen if he was taken into custody and he was sectioned? There's a pressure to get them out again because it costs too much money and they don't have the resources to keep them in.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a bit like just taking it into the round, if you like. You know, police officers are criticised for stop and search. It shouldn't be the police officers that are doing stop and search. It should be the parents stopping their kids from going out with knives.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is the key thing. And the fact that the kid was having these knives delivered and the parents were aware. How much culpability should there be for them? Look, I get, you know, I don't want these people, I think they have moved home, I believe. I don't want these people sort of, you know, shouted at and abused in the street. I don't think that solves anything. I really, really don't. And a lot of people might say, well, you know, they're as much a victim. Well, no, you didn't bury your kid at the age of 7 years old, so you're not. But people shouting at them or threatening them doesn't solve anything at all. But should they face some sort of criminal action, prosecution for failing? If you know someone could commit a crime and you don't do anything to stop that crime, is there any duty of care there?
Yes, there should be, absolutely. And, you know, we've got conspiracy acts where people are literally, you know, planning and taking part, but also a failure to report. It should be a criminal offence. It is a criminal offence. Yeah. And yes, prosecution. What good is it going to do? It's not going to bring those poor girls back. What we've got to, you know, we can only look forward. It's nothing much we can do now about these poor girls and those that have been injured, other than to look after the victims. But what we've got to do is make sure that it's very difficult for that to happen again, and that the people that have got the responsibility, whether it's the parents, it is, then other parents need to realise that if they don't do something practical to stop this from happening, then they can be prosecuted. And likewise, you know, the social services need to just have the resources. The police need to have the resources.
They do, but also there needs to be someone responsible who you know, like when you release a mentally ill patient, you know, from hospital, say with, you know, Valdo Calacane in Nottingham, who's responsible? So you convince this person is safe. So if this person turns out not to be safe, what happens then? Decisions by committee mean that no one takes responsibility, and then there is no punishment for the sort. When I say punishment for failure, 3 little girls in tiny little coffins is some kind of failure.
And if you go back over the years, Julia, you'll see loads of instances where people have been deemed, put into hospital, the doctor or whoever, doctor usually, releases them, and almost immediately criminal offences take place. Now, there should be some responsibility for that.
Yeah.
But you do have to give the doctors the resources to be able to do the job of locking them up if they have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. One of the recommendations apparently that is being made is that restricting the access to the internet for young people. I mean, again, that's like the whole let's have slightly blunter knives argument. I just despair. I really despair. Chris, really good to talk to you. Chris Phillips, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Appreciate you joining us. Benedict Spence, listening to all of that, I mean, it does make you despair, doesn't it?
It does make you despair. And part of the problem is, you know, as has sort of been touched upon before, you don't trust that anybody will learn from this. That's the thing. It doesn't matter how many times people say that they'll do it. I think we've just got to a point now where people, I'm sorry to say this, shrug and just assume it's not going to improve. They don't believe that different government agencies, different bodies will learn, that there'll be any new, you know, there might be any kind of reviews or new safeguards put in place. Will these actually work? I don't think anybody believes that they will. And I think that that's the real issue here. We're at a point now where nobody thinks the state will improve on.
I'd like to point out that the real problem here was not this the abject failures by the parents and all of these agencies to allow this young man to kill and stab and maim. The real issue was people writing hurty tweets on the internet.
It was a big problem.
Please try to keep up, Benedict, because that's the real issue. So do you know what? I've done this for a lot of years. I can't keep talking about these stories.
No.
I cannot keep talking about the abject criminal failures of our authorities to keep people, but particularly our children, safe.
Yeah.
I can't the frustration, you can see why people end up on the streets and why people, you know, the people are just saying it's enough is enough.
But not that many people relatively are doing this, and it's huge numbers that are, but not enough people have yet reached that. And what I'm just going to say this, and I know this is going to be very controversial, is that our society doesn't actually prioritise children. I don't think it does. I don't think it thinks about what is important to a society in general, and that is that you bring up the children and try to give them a better opportunity. I think we've lost sight of that. And you have to say, it's not just us, it's across the West in general. The attitude is not that you need to improve things for your children, it's for other things.
I'm pretty sure that being able to send your kid to some sort of holiday activity and have them come back alive, I'm going to go with that being a bare minimum expectation I have in this country. And if you can't deliver that as a country, you need to get the hell out of public life, because you are not doing your job properly. 12:41 is the time. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. 12:43 is the time. Let's go to my next guest now. He's Philip Kisley, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. And Philip, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Julia. It's great to see you.
Well, obviously wanted to talk to you about this Boris wave story that Reform are talking about today at press conference. But I'm sure you have been watching the footage of this inquiry from the Southport inquiry and this statement from the chairman, and the blame on the killer's parents, then the failures of all these agencies to act that left these three little girls, BB King, Elsie Stankham, and Alice De Silva Aguera, in coffins, 8 other little girls with life-changing, terrifying injuries, and many other little girls terrified and traumatised for life, and 2 adults as well. What's your reaction to that report?
Well, it's one of being stunned and being angry. Yeah. I say I'm stunned, not because any of it's new to me, it's because it's not new to me. Yeah. And I know that this society does not prioritise safety, children, women, all the rest of it. It prioritises, I was just listening to you, it prioritises, I was just writing it down, identity politics, skin colour, an offence. It prioritises a small number of people who politically take offence. Yeah. And when that happens, safeguarding goes out of the... We see it on every single issue, Julia, right? We see it in terms of borders, okay? People coming into our country, we're going to talk about that in a minute, who have no concern about sexually assaulting women and children. Yeah. We see it with the trans debate, okay, where biological men just were allowed into women's sports and women's spaces. It's always the same thing. It's about priorities, and our society is upside down in terms of what it takes seriously.
Oh, I couldn't agree with every single word more, I have to say. Look, let's talk about the announcement from Reform UK this morning, though. They were talking about basically getting rid of things like indefinite leave to remain. And there's been this big concern, so much so that even Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, and the Tories are also talking about, extending the right to, limiting the right to indefinite leave to remain to not just after 5 years, as you currently do after being here, but after 10 years, higher requirement in terms of your wages, your English language ability and all of that. Reform have said quite categorically, no, we're just going to get rid of it entirely. You'd be on 5-year visas and that's it, and you basically have to be a net contributor. So you're earning well over 35, 40k to be able to be doing that. But also they're talking about this Boris wave, there's 1.6 million people who moved to the UK under Boris Johnson. Many would argue massive betrayal of the Brexit promise to take back control of our borders. Between 21 and 24, we just saw this huge number of people. And they're saying that the cost of these people if they were able to get indefinite leave to remain, and that's one of the big issues, would be effectively £20,000 to every British household. That's extraordinary, that sum.
It's extraordinary, and and speaking as a great British taxpayer, Julia, I can't afford it. I can't afford these. I'm sorry, I can't. They're called low wage, high dependency, aren't they? But most of them are no wage, total dependency, and that is total catastrophe.
The vast majority of the people who came in that wave didn't come for work. They're either the dependents, the children. We have to provide schools for them, or they're the partners, or they're students who just stayed on.
Yeah, and it isn't just financial, although that's obviously the most pressing thing in terms of if it's going to sink the ship, good ship Britannia. But it's also societal and cultural as well. And the last story that we've just been talking about absolutely illustrates that, doesn't it? What do you do if you have, 2020, as late as 2024, there was still the best part of 1 million migrants. So nothing's changed. The numbers have come down a little bit from 22 and 23, but nothing's changed. There isn't a philosophical conceptual change in which that I would call it the biggest act of abuse perpetrated on the British public, which is mass immigration, the mass immigration experiment, which fundamentally has not worked. So Reform are saying, look, we're going to hold these people to account. We're going to hold Boris to account. And that's absolutely right. Now, the Tories are coming out and saying, oh, God, no, it's just theatrical. Don't do that. It'll cost some money.
They're talking about Boris Johnson having been forced to actually testify. They want to accuse him effectively of gross negligence in office amounting to criminal conduct. I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
No, I don't have a problem with that, and I would imagine the vast majority of the British people don't, because, as I say, this is the biggest act of abuse perpetrated on the British people, mass immigration. We look at everything, what's happening with it. Out of mass immigration comes Islamism. Out of mass immigration comes rocketing sexual abuse in the streets and all the rest of it. You can name it all. Okay, but what needs to happen? We need to draw a line under it, and we need to say we are changing. The philosophy of this country is going to change. And the only way the victims can come to terms with that is if there is some kind of mechanism to find out what went wrong so we cannot do it again.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, the fact that, people...
It's basic psychology.
Yeah, people knew what they voted for 2016. It wasn't like, because we're all bigots. In 2016, the Brexit referendum, it was about taking back control. And it was about national sovereignty and democratic accountability. And we got that. And then for some reason, Boris Johnson, who said he'd get Brexit done, and he did, but he thought that, I wonder, did he even know it was going on? Was it the civil servants just handing out those visas and no one noticed? And apparently it became an absolute surprise to the Conservative government they'd handed out all these visas. And that is just an extraordinary thing that could happen after the clear message that the British people had twice given to their political leaders. What do you make of the fact we've got local elections coming up? We've got, Labour sort of trying to be all sort of, all things to all men in terms of their red wall seats, but also their sort of Lib Dem, side of voters as well, competing with the Greens, who are now second in the polls. And we've got Reform, the Tories now sort of competing who can be tougher. I'm all in favour of that. But the Greens, extraordinarily, their policy that had their launch at the end of last week for the local elections, they want an open border policy. So not only if you can get here, you can stay, and nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we'll put you in an asylum hotel, realistically, you'll never be deported. They're saying, no, you can come. You'll never be deported. That's literally the point. They will never be deported. You won't even need to seek asylum because you could just come here, and we'll pay you a basic income just to be here. We would have about 4 million people turning up on the first Monday, wouldn't we?
We would indeed, and of course, there would be civil unrest, there would be riots in the street. It would be absolutely crazy, But the thing is, it's not just that. That's just one part of it. Also, they want to kind of legalise all things to do with the sex industry. So that would be brothels on the high street as well as Turkish barbers. They want to kind of really push their anti-Zionist, which really means anti-Semitic agenda as well. So this would be destroying British society. The fabric that weaves British society together would just be completely destroyed overnight. Now, the Labour Party are hapless. They're like a rabbit in headlights as far as the Green Party are concerned, aren't they? But the Green Party are a real threat to us. As I've said before, they represent the three things that are an absolute and definite, clear and present threat to this country. One is mass immigration, okay, which you've just outlined beautifully. The other one is Islamism. Okay, they are essentially the Islamist party because they're not interested in the environment anymore.
You never mention it. Never mention
it. And three, Julia, is identity politics. Now that poisonous combination of all those three things, all the troubles, which are the big troubles, the big issues that are currently affecting this country, all come from those three things. And the Green Party are the most poisonous personification of them. So the people who are voting, I mean, I couldn't believe Gorton and Denton, but the people who are voting for this kind of stuff and the practices around family voting and all of the rest of it are so poisonous that we need to deal with those mechanisms as well as the cultural and societal
Absolutely,
aspects.
although, Kesson, we're told the official reports denied that was an issue, but there we are. So good to talk to you. Covered a lot of ground there. Philip Kisley, he's a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum. Always good to talk to you. Right now, though, summer is on its way. There's no better way of spending a sunny afternoon than at Wimbledon, and we're giving you the chance to be there. We've got 2 tickets on Centre Court on Monday the 6th of July, and you could be there right in the heart of the action with official Wimbledon debenture seats and enjoy exclusive access to the debenture lounge all day long too. I've done this. It's brilliant. I cannot tell you how much fun this is. Here's how you could be in with a chance to win.
For your chance to win, text TALK.
Oh, I do apologise. I don't know what's quite happened there. Well, I don't think you are going to hear your chance to win. We're going to have to take a quick break and we'll come straight back and we'll get to your calls. This is Talk.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door and away we go.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Sorry we couldn't get those details of the competition. I'm sure it'll be on again in the next hour or so. 12:54 is the time. Benedict Spence, just a conversation with Philip Kisley. I mean, there's just no doubt at all that there is so much concern in this country about, you know, massive waves of immigration and how this changes things and the cultural impacts of that.
Yeah, and the thing is, we've been talking about this for so long. This is not a new thing, and it's just
how many years?
Shows, and we really are sort of splitting hairs over, well, we're going to reduce illegal immigration, we're going to try and find ways of doing that. And the reality is, as has been touched upon with the issue around indefinite leave to remain, the major issue facing this country is not, in fact, illegal immigration. It's legal migration. It's migration we've been told we need and we should be embracing. And it's only now, sort of years after people initially were warned, that finally, dragging their feet, the major parties are all going, maybe not, maybe not. And even then, they're not actually going to reverse
no one actually trusts them on it. No, indeed.
Yeah.
We had lots of calls about Brexit and about and I just do want to get to a final call, though. Sorry, obviously with the details of that inquiry, we obviously want to talk in detail about that. But Joan is on the line. She's given us a call on 0344 499 1000 about that report from the Southport inquiry. Joan, in Sunderland, what do you want to say?
Well, I would like to see anyone involved in this named and shamed, and that includes the parents.
Well, we know. We've seen them named and shamed. We know who they are, and they gave evidence at the inquiry. The chair has said, look, you know, he doesn't want people to vilify or target them, and I don't want that to happen either. That's, you know, but do you think they should face some sort of prosecution?
Yes, but also I want justice to be colourblind.
Yeah,
I am fed up of colour and ethnicity becoming more important than the victims. I want to see justice served. Let it be across the board. It doesn't matter what colour, what gender, what ethnicity. If you have done something, you are punished for what you have done. And nobody should be hands off. Oh no, you might cause a riot, you might cause this because that one's coloured or that one belongs to a certain religion. That has to stop.
I know, and it's absolute madness. I mean, and this keeps on happening. And again, it's people writing tweets about it, apparently, is the problem. But there are 3 little girls lying in coffins underground right now in Southport. Not because of someone writing a tweet or anything, but because a load of people whose job it was to stop people who were dangerous from killing people, they failed to do their job, and they all just wipe their hands, they all walk back, and they go home and they put dinner on the table for their kids, but the parents of those 3 little girls don't get to do that.
No, exactly. But it's like everything else with this wokery and DEI. It's all about ticking boxes.
It's always.
That's got to stop. That's got to be thrown out of the window. It should have been thrown out a long time ago.
With you all the way.
Get rid of that rubbish. This is going to happen time and time again.
Yeah. Joan, I couldn't agree with you more. Great call. Thank you so much. Joan in Southern there. Benedict Spence, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. But when does it get thrown out of the window? We have to wait now. We have to wait until there is a general election and hope that whoever takes over from this government, that, you know, well, for a start, we have to hope that somebody does take over from this government and that it isn't simply a continuation of the one that we currently have. And then you have to hope that they actually have the numbers and the gumption to do it. And we're already seeing actually a lot of, you know, hesitancy about whether or not reform can actually get it done because of what they face, the blob.
Absolutely. Benedict Spence, thank you very much. It's been great having you here. Gosh, we've covered a lot of very different topics today. I'm delighted to say Mark Dolan is here standing in for Ian Collins for the next couple of weeks. Hello.
Well, it's great to see you in a big 3 hours, and what a breaking story that is regarding Southport. Do you remember when you were far right if you were concerned about the consequences of mass immigration and incompatible cultures?
Still far right, apparently.
It's crazy, so we'll have a look at that. Also, the special relationships. So Starmer won't support Donald Trump in the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz.